Before we jump in, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and turn on notifications. It seriously helps the channel grow. All right, let's get started. Saved by dragon years before canon, Sabo never truly dies, and that single change reshapes everything. When Ace, Sabo, and Luffy set out to sea, Luffy does so with something no rookie pirate should have: knowledge of the Grand Line's dangers, politics, and hidden truths. As captain of the Straw Hat Pirates, Luffy's foreknowledge subtly but steadily alters their journey. Alliances are formed earlier, threats are handled smarter, and tragedies hover closer to prevention than inevitability. Still unmistakably Luffy, he balances instinct and foresight as the crew navigates a world that fights back against being changed. This is a second-chance story where friendship, fate, and freedom collide, and the Grand Line refuses to be conquered quietly. Disclaimer: this story do not belong to me. The author is Second Round by Rasberry Joe.
Chapter 3, Recruiting the Sharpshooter. The group had been slowly making their way through the seas towards Gecko Island. Nothing remarkable happened aside the fact that they ran out of meat, again. Luffy was really disappointed that they amazingly hadn't ran into any ships since leaving Shell's town. "I'm Boo Red," Luffy moaned. "At least on a proper ship I could train you guys or play a game, but there's no room here." "Train," Zoro and Nami echoed together. "Yup, you guys haven't even cracked your true potential." Luffy grinned maniacally, promising a darkly sinister future for his nakama. "You think so?" Zoro asked skeptically. As far as he knew, he was quite strong. Luffy grinned and nodded his head enthusiastically, looking like he was Jack the Ripper about to pounce on a whore. "I'm going to teach all of you to use haki." Sabo rolled his eyes. "Before that you should actually explain what it is," he suggested. "Ah, right, it's." Before he could say anything more, a sailboat bearing a pirate insignia pulled up next to them and three thugs climbed over. "Hello gentlemen and lady. We'll be taking everything of value in exchange for your safe passage," one of the three said as they each pulled out short swords or daggers. "When did they sneak up on us?" Nami asked in surprise. "They've been following us for about an hour," Luffy answered, sounding bored again. Sabo raised an eyebrow. Luffy's mood swings had been getting more severe since they left Grand Line. "Was there a reason for that?" "Do you mind taking care of this, Zoro-san?" Sabo requested politely. The three watched dispassionately as Zoro beat the crap out of all three with his fists, not even bothering to draw even a single blade. Now they were sitting in a circle, completely covered in bruises, but all smiling in an attempt to soothe the mess they had tangled themselves in. "Hee, who would have thought that you were the famous pirate hunter Zoro?" the spokesman said nervously. "Please forgive us," they all exclaimed. "Hey guys, look at this," Nami exclaimed from the newcomer's boat. She showed her companions a treasure chest filled with money and jewels. "Wow, I wasn't expecting that," Luffy said, surprised that such a small boat would hold such treasure. "Maybe Zoro-san can get better swords now," Sabo mused out loud. "What's wrong with my swords?" Zoro asked, slightly insulted. "With that white one nothing. But the other two are far too ordinary. They'll do for some time, but with the battles that are sure to come you need something with more quality. Trust me, having your weapon fail you in a crucial moment is not pleasant." It was then Sabo noticed the Jolly Roger. "Nay, Luffy, doesn't that ring any bells?" he asked his younger brother. Luffy looked at the flag. A skull with a big red nose. "Why does that seem familiar?" Luffy's sharp ears picked up a whisper from the three nameless pirate thugs. "Captain Buggy will kill us if he finds out we lost our boat and treasure to a bunch of no-names." "Buggy?" Luffy asked, and the three flinched at being caught. Who's Buggy?" Zoro asked from his lounging position. "What? You don't know Buggy the Clown?" Thug number 2 exclaimed in surprise. "Never heard of him," Zoro replied nonchalantly. Thug number 1 made a dramatic face and started explaining. "He's the captain of our crew. He's got the power of a devil's fruit and he's a very fearsome man." "Is he somewhere near this area?" Luffy asked, getting excited again. The three nodded mutely. "Awesome, let's go meet him." "Nami, we're giving the treasure chest back." "What?" Nami exclaimed, not happy at all. "But Captain," she started protesting. "Sorry, but taking it away would make Buggy mad at us." "I don't want that." Luffy shook his head. "Your captain understands how dangerous our captain is," Thug number 1 said, emboldened by Luffy's words. "No, that's not it." Luffy shook his head. "Buggy's just a friend of a friend. Now, let's go meet him." They had finally docked at a seemingly abandoned town. Suddenly a loud crash was heard. "I wonder what made that loud explosion." Sabo mused out loud. "That's our Captain Buggy's buggy bomb," one of the thugs replied nervously. "Buggy bomb," Zoro smirked. "This actually might not be a complete snorefest." The group made their way towards where the thugs said the buggy crew to be. Buggy's underlings were carrying the treasure chest, much to Nami's displeasure, though she did manage to nick something or other here and there. This town seems really deserted. Luffy wondered out loud as they made their way through the empty streets. Of course, Thug number 1 exclaimed, as it should have been obvious. Captain Buggy's made everyone terrified of him, right? Everybody from this town's evacuated. Luffy frowned, not really liking what he heard. Why would he need to do that? The thugs looked at Luffy like he was an idiot, but wisely didn't say anything. They arrived at where Buggy was lodging and partying. He was in a generally good mood and chugging grog with his underling. He noticed the newcomers a moment later. "Where have you been, you flashy louts? What's in the chest?" he bellowed. The thugs placed the chest in front of him and opened it. Buggy's eyes bugged out at the sight of all the treasure. "Hoo-hoo, you boys are definitely forgiven. Come, have a drink in celebration." He cheered happily. Captain, we sort of ran into people who wanted to meet you." Thug number 1 said carefully. The captain was in a good mood right now, but he was known to have a 180 at any given moment. Buggy turned to look at the group of young people he hadn't noticed a moment ago. "Who are you kids?" he asked in a slightly rude tone. "Just a bunch of pirates." Luffy answered with a grin. He had decided to ignore the state of the town for the time being. "You brats. Pirates." Buggy snorted. Luffy pouted. "Why not? You were even younger when you apprenticed at Oro Jackson, weren't you?" The name rang a bell in both Nami and Zoro's minds, but they could not remember where they had heard it before. Buggy turned to look at the young pirates with a bit more interest. Come to think of it, that straw hat looked awfully familiar. Not many people are aware of that. How did you know that? Shanks told me about you. He sends his regards, by the way. Buggy was so surprised he fell off his seat. That flashy idiot, where do you know that shitty man? He raged. Sabo frowned and Luffy pouted. That's rude, you know. Shanks always spoke about you with fondness. Luffy said. That did not improve Buggy's mood at all. Actually, it threw him into a tirade about the story why he hated Shanks with passion. Luffy's reaction was quite predictable. So, Shanks saved your life. He stated. No, you moron. He destroyed my dream and delayed my plans by 10 years. Buggy raged. It's unlikely you would have been able to get your underwater treasure by swimming anyway. Nami spoke up for the first time. BWUH. Buggy sputtered. The treasure would have likely been so deep you not only would have ran out of breath a long time ago, but the pressure would have squished your body. You'd have been more likely to find your treasure with a submarine. She stated matter-of-factly. If it had been nighttime you would have heard the crickets chirping a moment before Buggy cried out in denial and holy anger. He whipped out 6 throwing daggers, 3 on either hand between each finger, and separated his upper body from his lower half. With an enraged scream he flew at Nami. Before he could make it to the ginger navigator, however, a big cloud of dust appeared out of nowhere. I had no harmful intention towards you, Buggy. One could hear the cheerful straw hat wearing boy say through the cloud. However, at that moment he didn't sound the least bit cheerful. Honestly, his voice could be described as demonic. However, if you intend to harm any of my nakama, you'd better be willing to accept the consequences. The dust had begun to settle and the silhouettes were becoming more visible. Buggy's top half was face first in the ground with Luffy sitting on his back. Luffy's hand was strewn through Buggy's hair as if to hold it in its subdued position. What? Buggy's muffled voice said moments before his hands dislocated from his arms and made to attack Luffy. That wasn't nearly as effective as he would have hoped, as Luffy had, aside from his monstrous strength, unbelievable speed. Luffy swatted Buggy's dagger-wielding hands away with quick, well-placed kicks. Get off of me, WOUBWAT. Buggy whined and dislocated every part he could. That meant only his head got taken prisoner. For a moment Luffy and Buggy stared at one another. How can you be so weak, anyway? You and Shanks started off the same and now you terrorize small towns in East Blue while he's one of the Yonko. Buggy's eyebrow twitched. Are you trying to piss me off? He screamed, eyeballs white from fury. Luffy sighed and shrugged. I was really hoping for more. Instead I find this pitiful weakling terrorizing a village to make himself feel better about his tiny penis size. Everyone, including Luffy's own crew, sweat dropped at Luffy's random comment. Nami-chan, it looks like you'll be getting that treasure chest after all. The fight between Buggy and Luffy couldn't be called much of a fight at all. The gist of it was Luffy punching Buggy flying for miles. And that was it. Well, this was a total waste of time. Sabo commented nonchalantly. Really, I was hoping for a fight. Zoro said, also quite bored. What are you two talking about? This is awesome. Nami on the other hand was in nirvana as she cuddled the treasure chest. Suddenly another thought occurred to her. You, she barked and pointed towards a random pirate from Buggy's crew. Where's the rest of the treasure? And the Grand Line map. If you don't get them for me, my captain will beat you up. Right, Captain. Nami finished evilly and shot the last part towards Luffy, who had already sat down and stuffed his face with food from Buggy's banquet. Yeah, sure. Luffy replied and gave Nami thumbs up, probably not even noticing what he was agreeing to. Nevertheless, it was enough to intimidate the shit out of Buggy's crew and they immediately scurried off to comply with Nami's request. Some time later the group left Orangetown and headed back to port.
Yo, quick pause, smash that like button, hit subscribe if you're new here, share this video, and tell me in the comments which part you're loving the most.
Finally the group arrived at Gecko Island. It was a tiny island that was only big enough to support one village. And that one village was Syrup Village. Luffy could barely sit still from excitement. Sabo had explained that an old friend of theirs was a first-rate sharpshooter and that his son was living on this island and that Luffy was hoping he could recruit him as their own sharpshooter. But don't say anything, I want to test him first. Luffy said and made shushing sound while bouncing around, too eager to get to land. Luffy didn't pay much attention to the conversation his travel mates were having. He was sitting on the very top of the boat and practically sparkling with excitement. Should we be worried about him? Nami asked out loud. That's the kind of guy he is, Miss Navigator. Believe it or not, this is him being completely serious. Sabo explained. Nami and Zoro raised an eyebrow. You don't need to be alarmed though, he's very devoted to his friends regardless how he is usually behaving. The only time he actually acts serious, in the traditional sense of the word, is when an enemy really angers him. Trust me, that is something you don't want to see, sadly it's probably inevitable. At that moment the boat pulled up on the sandy shore. Luffy jumped off. Let's go find something to eat, then see what's there to see here. Should have figured, Nami and Zoro both thought as they climbed off the boat. It feels pretty damn nice to stand on solid ground again. Zoro said and stretched. That's because you were asleep the entire way. We made another stop at an island about a day ago. Nami scolded the swordsman lightly. By the way, I just noticed a moment ago, Zoro said and gained his companion's attention. What are those kids doing over there? He pointed towards land where 4 young kids had been hiding. Wah, we've been found. 3 younger kids freaked out immediately. Stop being such scaredy cats. The 4th, older one, scolded the younger boys. Are you guys travelers? The older kid asked the 4 companions. We're pirates. Luffy replied bluntly, making Nami smack her forehead. At that the kids ran away screaming, leaving the older boy alone. The lone young man stood up and crossed his arms. Fellow pirates, listen here strangers, I am the great pirate fleet leader, Captain Usopp. This village is under my command and if you try to attack it, me and my 80 million men will not forgive you. Luffy cocked his head, really confused. Where are your men? There's barely 1,000 people on this island, none who are fighter material. No wait, there is one. Nami and Sabo shook their heads at her captain's selective naivety. You're lying, right? She asked the boy. Caught. Usopp grabbed his head and freaked out. And you said it yourself. Usopp completely lost his cool head and wailed at himself for bad planning. Or something like that. Nevertheless Luffy was laughing his butt off. Usopp apparently didn't like being laughed at like that. He stopped berating himself in favor of being angry at the young pirate captain. Don't underestimate me. I'm a man with high self-esteem. Luffy stopped laughing and looked the young man in the eyes. Then took a few steps towards the team. Usopp was about to reach for his slingshot when the straw hat wearing young man disappeared only to reappear in front of him fraction of a second later. Usopp, eeped in surprise, and the strange youth put his hand in the middle of Usopp's face to cover his nose. Shishishishi. Aside from the nose and black hair you really are a spitting image of Usopp. Luffy giggled. You're his son Usopp, right? You know my dad. Usopp exclaimed in surprise. Sure, he's an old friend of mine. Say Usopp, is there a place to eat around here? A while later, after Usopp was convinced the pirates had no interest in pillaging the village, he took the group to the local food joint called Meshi. So, you're in town looking for companions in a ship? Usopp asked as they were eating. Luffy nodded as he tore into his meat. There's only one ship owner in the entire village. It's not a very large ship but it's not that small either. The owner of the ship belongs to a wealthy family and lives in that mansion. Is that so? Sabo said, not too enthusiastic, considering how picky Luffy had been so far. Well, we say she's the owner but really she's just a weak frail girl. Her parents died about a year ago from sickness and left her everything. Usopp sighed. Not all the money in the world could save you from sorrow, I guess. There was a moment of silence. Let's forget about searching for a ship in this village and look elsewhere. Nami sighed and shook her head. That's fine, but we're absolutely in no hurry. For one thing I want more meat in our supply. Luffy agreed with his navigator, but not for the same reasons. By the way, you mentioned earlier that you were looking for companions. Usopp gained Luffy's attention. Is there someone here that wants to be our companion? Luffy asked with a wide grin. Let me be the captain, and I'll join you. Usopp exclaimed dramatically. Never mind. Nami and Zoro said while letting their heads fall limp on their chests in a show of disappointment. Sabo was impassive but Luffy started laughing quite uproariously. Alright, he said much to the surprise of everyone. If you can beat me in a one-on-one. The shock wore off immediately and the group shook their heads with smirks. That sounded more like their captain. One-on-one. Usopp asked, surprised. Well, of course. Traditionally the captain should be one of the strongest, if not the strongest, fighters in a pirate crew. Following someone one could beat too easily would be way too embarrassing. Never mind. Usopp let his head fall on his chest as a sign of giving up. I just remembered I need to be somewhere. Well then I guess I'll see you later. Usopp then hightailed out of the tavern. Didn't you want that guy as our sharpshooter? Zoro asked, a bit skeptical. Luffy shrugged nonchalantly. Like I said, we're not in any hurry. Luffy continued with his meal like he didn't have a worry in the world, which he probably didn't at that moment. Zoro and Nami ordered a pint each and had a friendly competition of who could finish theirs first. The loser had to take up crow's nest duty first once they got their ship. Zoro won by a fraction, though he was damn impressed by the ginger navigator's ability to keep up with him. Nay, Zoro, I challenge you to drink the captain under the table tonight. Nami said evilly in a form of revenge. Apparently she didn't like losing bets very much. Nay, Captain, how about a drinking contest with me tonight? Zoro asked, his pride not allowing him to turn down such a challenge. Sure, Luffy agreed cheerfully and proceeded to finish his meat. Sabo had a hard time maintaining his poker face. Suddenly the door burst open and three young boys stormed in. Usopp pirate group is here. They shouted together. Nami leaned on her seat to look towards the ruckus. Who are they? She wondered. No idea. Luffy responded and lifted his mug. They look like the three scaredy cats from when we arrived. Sabo said calmly. Oh, you're right. Luffy exclaimed with a nod and started downing his drink. Suddenly the boys seemed to freak a bit and rushed to their table. Why you pirates? What have you done with Captain Usopp? The middle boy wearing an odd green hat shouted. Give him back. The other two boys backed their friend. It was at that moment that Luffy slammed his empty mug on the table and exclaimed out loud happily. Mon, that was some good meat. The three young boys huddled together in fright and shock. Meat? Don't tell me Captain was. What did you do to him? It was then Zoro gained an extra evil look. Your captain was just delicious, he said with an insane glint in his eyes. The three boys cried out and called Nami a hag at the same time for some reason. Nami, who had been amused up until now, lost all sense of humor and almost seemed to actually turn into a hag as she clobbered the poor kids for calling her that. Stop telling them such weird things. She turned back to Zoro, who was busy laughing his ass off along with Luffy and Sabo. Sabo got off his seat to help the traumatized kids off the floor and explained how they were just joking. So Captain said he needs to be somewhere and left by himself. They echoed Sabo's explanation. Oh, then he went to the mansion. The green hat wearing boy, Piemon, exclaimed. Where the sick girl lives? Nami asked, surprised. Why does he go there? Luffy wondered, surprised as well. To tell lies. Ninjin, the boy with a black hoodie and hair that hid his eyes, replied. The pirate's sweat dropped. The way the boys acted that seemed like actually a decent thing to do. Then the boys explained how Usopp went to the mansion to tell the girl tall tales to cheer her up. Wow, what a nice guy. Luffy exclaimed. How's his sharpshooting skills? He asked, seemingly randomly. The boys looked surprised. How did you know Captain was good with a slingshot? The bespectacled boy, Tomonegi, asked. Slingshot. The pirates echoed in surprise. Yes, Captain can shoot pachinko balls like they were bullets. Piemon exclaimed with stars in his eyes. Really? That's not something you hear every day. Sabo mused, mildly impressed. Let's check that out later. Luffy agreed with his brother. By the way, you said the mansion owner feels better after hearing Usopp's lies. The three boys nodded. Alrighty, let's go ask her for a ship. Luffy decided, but Nami didn't like that idea. No, didn't you just say you'd give it up? She protested. There's no harm in asking, Nami-chan. It's not like I'm going to steal it. He does have a point. Zoro agreed. Nami only massaged her temples. Fine, but not today. I want a nice soft bed to sleep in tonight. She said finally. Why can't we do that and still ask her today? Luffy asked, confused. Just in case people react badly and want to drive us out of town. Luffy accepted the explanation with a grin. Sabo however didn't see why people would react so aggressively even if they were turned down by the mansion's owner. He shrugged and decided to indulge her this time. As Luffy said, they were not in any hurry. After they were all full they went to rent rooms in an inn. It was a small establishment and didn't look like it saw much business. They rented 2 rooms, one for the men and another for Nami alone. Personally Luffy didn't see why one of them couldn't share a room with Nami, but he's come to accept that men and women don't usually like sharing rooms. Though, he still couldn't see why. Some time later they split up. Luffy left to find Usopp, Nami and Sabo went to find excessive amount of alcohol for the evening's drinking competition and Zoro snoozed in the inn. Luffy found Usopp easily since he had the second strongest spirit among the entire island, if you didn't include Luffy's own companions. Luffy had been wondering about the other warrior-level person living in Syrup Village, but right now he had more pressing urges. Yo! He greeted the young sharpshooter loudly. Usopp yelped, jumped in surprise and lost his aim, shooting a small ball of paint into the sky instead of the painted target. The budding sniper twirled around and came face to face with the straw hat-wearing pirate captain. "When did you sneak up on me?" Usopp inquired loudly while massaging his palpitating heart. "Just now. I haven't even had the chance to see if your sniping skills are up to par with your old man's."
Yo, quick pause, smash that like button, hit subscribe if you're new here, share this video, and tell me in the comments which part you're loving the most.
Usopp blushed, feeling slightly embarrassed by Luffy's upbeat attitude. "To be honest, I wouldn't know. I haven't seen him in over 10 years. He admitted shyly. "Oh yeah, I almost forgot. This is for you. It's from your dad." Luffy aloofly threw a flintlock pistol at Usopp, who caught it clumsily. "My dad?" Usopp echoed, disbelieving. "Yup, I promised him I'd deliver that gift regardless whether you joined my crew or not." Luffy grinned while rocking himself back and forth in a childish fashion. Usopp had been distracted by the pistol, admiring it like it was the most precious gem, so he almost missed what Luffy said afterwards. "Huh, what did you say?" Luffy blinked for a few times before it finally hit home. Then he clamped both hands to his mouth. "Whoops, I didn't mean to say that out loud. Please forget it." The look on Luffy's face gave Usopp the impression he meant it literally. Awkward silence ensued. Luffy barely noticed though. "So, Usopp tried to fill the silence. Why you wanted me as a nakama?" Luffy pouted. "You were supposed to forget it." Spontaneously the smile was back a moment later. Well, I guess you can't. Yeah, I may be here to see if I want you in my crew. Your dad really loved telling tales about you. I swear my ears were ready to fall off. So I asked if he would shut up if I made you my nakama." Luffy took a pause to laugh. "He didn't, but he did give me that pistol to give to you. I got to say, though, I pretty much like what I've seen so far. So show me some sniping too." Usopp wasn't quite sure how to handle the exuberant teen, so he nervously opted to do as asked and show his skill with a slingshot. He hit the mark bull's-eye. "Nice. Now hit that," Luffy requested cheerfully, pointing to a mark much farther away, and a lot more difficult to hit. "You want me to hit that tree there?" Usopp asked, not really worried. He could do it. "No," Luffy snorted. "I want you to hit that hole in the tree." Usopp looked at the tree again. The hole looked barely big enough. "Are you serious?" he exclaimed, his eyes wide. Usopp could shoot the antennae off an ant halfway across town. Oh yeah, that was helping Usopp's nerves. Gulping, he steadied his slingshot and released the pellet. It slightly nicked the edge of the hole, but otherwise hit home. A loud screeching was heard and a pissed-off, bleached white squirrel popped out of the hole. Luffy held his stomach from laughing. "Oh, poor squirrel. I wouldn't want to wake up getting paint all over me. Nice shooting though, Usopp." "Of course, I'm just that good." Usopp bragged, though he had honestly expected to miss. Luffy giggled. Usopp and Luffy ended up talking until sunset. They traded stories about mostly Usopp and the tales that Usopp told Kaya to cheer her from her gloom. Luffy found the ones especially amusing that were accidentally true, like one with Sky Island and the Goldfish Turd Islands. He didn't tell Usopp they were true though. Around the time of sunset, Luffy went to the inn. Sabo and Nami were in the boys' room, enjoying a drink and some snacks. "Hey, Cap'n, where've you been?" Nami asked. She seemed to be in high spirits. "I went to talk with Usopp. He's not half bad of a sniper." "What did you do?" Luffy replied. "Nothing much. This sleepy village doesn't have anything interesting. Though we did get the grog for tonight." Nami pointed towards about a dozen kegs in the room. "Really? What's going to happen tonight?" Luffy asked. Sabo and Nami turned towards the young captain. "You are supposed to have a drinking competition with Zoro." Nami deadpanned. "Really?" Luffy asked, surprised. Sabo rolled his eye. Luffy doesn't always notice his surroundings when he's eating. He explained. Nami accepted the fact with a shrug. "Well, I challenged our swordsman to challenge you for a drinking competition, so he challenged you and you accepted." Nami said with an evil grin. "But you know the outcome already." Luffy pointed out, confused. "Yes, exactly." There was a sinister glint in the navigator's eyes. "Zoro's going down," she cackled. "Speaking of Zoro, where is he?" Luffy asked after noticing the Marimo missing. "He went for a walk shortly before we returned to the room. We ran into him in the middle of the village. Though, he should be getting back just about now," Nami explained. It was an hour later when Zoro finally came into the room. "Yo, Zoro, where have you been?" Luffy shouted cheerfully. "For a walk," the swordsman grumbled. "Zuru got loosed," Nami mocked slyly. By the pissed-off look she received, she was spot on. "Bet you can't beat the captain in drinking," she goaded. "What are the stakes?" Zoro replied confidently. How about, the loser has to take the other one's every single crow's nest duty for a year." "Deal." Luffy opened his mouth, but Sabo placed his hand on his shoulder to keep him from saying anything. The next morning Zoro wore an ice pack on his head, his captain's cheerful laughing not making him feel any better either. The biggest blow to his ego, however, was the ginger's gloating look. Luffy, Sabo and Nami went to the mansion while Zoro opted to stay at the inn to sleep off his hangover somewhat. "So, this is the gate." Luffy stated the obvious. So, now what? Nami asked, still not wanting to bother the ailing rich girl. She turned her head to look at her captain only to realize he wasn't there. Let's just go in, Luffy said from on top of the gate. Nami's sweat dropped. He's pretty sure about himself, isn't he? Nami whispered to Sabo. Luffy's life policy is to live his life without regrets. Sabo answered with a chuckle. Nami sighed in an irritated fashion and rubbed her temples. I guess if I can't stop him I'll just have to follow him. Sabo, being the gentlemanly pirate he is, helped Nami climb faster and the two ran to catch up with Luffy. Hello, Luffy shouted cheerfully as he spotted Usopp telling a blonde a story through a window. What are you doing here? Usopp shouted in surprise, not having expected to see the young captain to show up in Kaya's yard. Askin' for a favor, Luffy replied cheerfully. He turned his head towards Kaya. Hey there, you must be the princess of this estate. Kaya blushed slightly at Luffy's choice of words which made Usopp's eyebrow twitch with annoyance. I'm not really a princess. She stammered slightly embarrassed but pleased nonetheless. You wanted a favor. Yup, you see, my crew and I are in need of a ship. Luffy sent a wide grin at Kaya. You there, what are you doing here? Another voice interrupted their conversation. The owner of the voice was a man that looked to be in his 30s, and he did not look happy. Ah, the butler, Usopp whispered with a look of severe dislike. Kurohadol, Kaya exclaimed. Luffy and Sabo tensed momentarily. They both had sensed there was a non-civilian type in the village, but both had assumed it was either someone retired or on vacation. But this person was a man in his prime and working as a butler. Maybe he was also a bodyguard. It wasn't that much of a stretch of imagination. The brothers shared a look and shrugged it off for now. You are trespassing here, he barked, ill-tempered and confident. Oh yeah, definitely part of the security. Kurohadol, these people, Kaya started. You don't need to tell me now. I'll listen later, he said boldly. Luffy raised an eyebrow and another thought about the man's identity occurred to him. Please vacate the premises immediately. Or do you have something to say? Are you her fiancé? Luffy asked bluntly. The reactions varied. Usopp fell over in shock. Kaya spluttered and went red at the very idea. Nami had no idea how her captain came up with that idea and wanted to slap her forehead, but Sabo found his little brother's question plausible. Kurohadol turned into a statue for a moment before readjusting his glasses with his palm. What made you come up with such a ludicrous idea? He demanded. Not asked, demanded. Just your general behavior towards your master. A servant isn't allowed to speak out of terms like that unless under special circumstances. Sabo explained, remembering his childhood and how his parents treated their servants. Ah no, he's just looking after me, Kaya claimed, trying to avoid even more embarrassment. You're far too lenient, princess. Not everyone have your best interest at heart, Luffy said with his brows furrowed. This girl was really soft-hearted and also quite naive. The wake-up call would hurt like a bitch when or if it comes. The light glinted off Kurohadol's glasses ominously. He turned his gaze towards Usopp. You're Usopp, are you not? He stated. I've heard some rumors about you. The villagers talk. Oh, you can call me Captain Usopp. Everyone does, Usopp said with a false cocky smile. I've heard rumors about your father as well. Kurohadol said cruelly. You are just the son of a low-class pirate. Kurohadol's goal was to goad Usopp and he seemed to succeed quite well, but he didn't foresee the other male teens to burst out laughing. Usopp a low-class pirate. Luffy giggled. Maybe in another reality, Sabo said as he tried to catch his breath again. Nay, guys, if the sniper of one of the Yonko is a low-class pirate, then what's an elite pirate? Luffy asked through tears. Speaking of pirates, we need a ship, princess, but you never gave us an answer before. Nami's sweat dropped slightly at her captain's strange thinking patterns. Though, pirates and ships are pretty intimately involved. Absolutely not, Kurohadol barked. Oh sorry, I was under the impression the ship belonged to Princess. Luffy said an honest apology. It does belong to her but, Kurohadol started but he was interrupted by a pissed-off Luffy. Then why's you answer instead? Kurohadol opened his mouth to answer but Luffy made a sharp shushing sound to silence him. He glared at the potential pirate captain as he turned back towards Kaya. So what do you say? Kaya looked uncertainly towards Kurohadol and bit her lip for a while. I'm sorry, but I don't even know you. Luffy turned his puppy eyes of doom at the ailing girl. You won't. Are you sure? Are you certain you won't change your mind? He pouted. Kaya blushed at the absolutely adorable look the young pirate sported. Sorry. She apologized sincerely. Luffy shrugged nonchalantly. Ah well, happens. Let's see how Zoro is doing. Nice meeting ya, princess. The trio went on their way. Want to come too, Usopp? Luffy shouted back before they made it to the gate. Yeah, poking people who have hangovers with sticks is always fun. Nami added as well. Are you trying to kill him? Sabo thought at Nami's comment. Usopp did leave with them, but he didn't go to see how Zoro's hangover was, instead he said he wanted to be alone for a moment. The gang decided to let Usopp do as he pleased. Right now they were enjoying a grumbling swordsman. Usually Zoro didn't have hangovers, however his competitive streak made him drink nearly up to alcohol poisoning the night before. So here he was, enjoying his mortality. By the way, Luffy, did you notice the other non-civilian type appear today? Sabo asked while Zoro was nursing his water. Luffy blinked and concentrated on his Kanbun Shoku haki. Hey, you're right. Though, he's not that strong. Luffy replied. What are you, psychics? Zoro grumbled, his mood understandably sour. In a manner of speaking. Sabo said mysteriously. Nope, this is haki. Luffy said and rolled his eyes. I remember you said that's something you'll teach us. Nami said as she remembered the young captain mentioned something about it a few days ago. What is haki anyway? Zoro asked. Luffy got more comfortable before starting his explanation. Haki in the literal sense means ambition. Every human being can potentially learn to use the two main branches of haki, however most people lack the drive needed to unlock it. I'm quite positive both of you are capable of equipping haki with some prodding. So far it's simple, right? Nami and Zoro nodded. The two main branches are called Kanbun Shoku and Busoshoku haki. The one Sabo and I were just talking about, the one you had us dubbed, psychic, is the former. Kanbunshoku, or the color of observation, is sort of a sixth sense that tells you where your opponent is when you can't see them, how many there are, and even what they're planning on physically doing next. Zoro immediately remembered Luffy's blindfolded fight against Morgan. Kanbunshoku haki is sort of hearing a person's very spirit. At that Luffy shuddered. Hearing the voice disappear when a person dies is one of the most morbid things one could experience though. What did you mean by non-civilian type you mentioned earlier? Zoro asked. Kanbunshoku haki can also be used to determine a person's potential strength in battle. That butler guy for instance, he's someone who has probably taken someone's life with marvelous success. Sabo said, coming out sounding a bit darker than he had planned. Nami felt a shudder run down her spine. Also the more skill you have the wider and more accurate your range is. Usually you need hard training or severe mental shock or stress to awaken any sort of haki, however I've heard of a case when a person is actually born with it active. Luffy and Sabo took off their respective headwear. May she rest in peace. Then they both put their hats back and went on like nothing happened. The other one, Busoshoku haki or the color of armaments, is sort of like wearing an invisible armor. However that armor doesn't weigh anything and it doesn't constrict your movements in the slightest. If anything it actually gives you more speed if controlled skillfully. Luffy explained while Sabo stood up and took out his bow staff. He swung it at Luffy hard, but it bounced back slightly before it could make contact. Of course that armor could be used as weapon as well if you augment your offensive attacks with it. If Sabo had used haki against me it would have penetrated my own and that would have hurt. Nami and Zoro could feel the resonance the harsh blow created in the air. Sabo had not hit his brother lightly in the least. Sabo flicked Luffy's forehead. Ow! Luffy exclaimed and glared at his brother who only laughed. Another thing it's useful for is that it penetrates any advantage a devil's fruit gives a person. For example Luffy, being a rubber man, is almost immune to blunt damage. The two students chuckled while Luffy only pouted and kept rubbing his forehead. Those are the two main branches of haki the every person has, even if they live and die without once awaking it. There is a third variation of haki, however that is something only a select few are born with. Sabo said once Nami and Zoro had settled. The third type is called Haoshoku haki, or the king's disposition. It is something only about 1 out of a million could potentially use. Luffy is one of them, and so is Ace, Sabo pouted. Luffy patted his brother's hand consolingly. There, Sabo. You're plenty strong even without it. Sabo ruffled Luffy's hair, making his straw hat fall off. Luffy let out an angry protest and pulled it back on. Haoshoku haki's function is to literally overpower your opponent's will with your own. It can be used to tame simple-minded beasts instantly and knock people with inferior wills unconscious. There are people whose wills are strong enough to attain immunity, though. Luffy explained the last part. That's what you did to that bastard son of Morgan's. Zoro realized. Yep. Luffy nodded and let a burst of his haki loose in the room. Zoro felt a strong chill go down his, but Nami grasped her chest and started panting while breaking into cold sweat. Oh, sorry, Nami-chan. I haven't completely mastered my control, but at least I know enough not to knock anyone out by accident. Luffy apologized sheepishly. What the hell did you do that for? Nami asked, actually screamed, once her breathing was back in control. Sorry. I just wanted to give a demonstration. Should have done it a bit lighter though. Measuring quantities is also something I can't control perfectly yet, but it's better than my aim. Nami stole Zoro's water in hopes to wash away the lingering shivers. Zoro was too distracted to protest. Do you think I may have that? He asked in hope. The brothers shrugged. The possibilities are 1 in a million, though the world's strongest are more likely to have it. There's a reason why it's called King's Disposition. Of course even if you don't have it, it doesn't mean you have any less potential. Sabo explained. How many do you know of, besides Luffy and your other brother, who have it? Nami asked and Zoro finally noticed his water bottle missing. Well, there's Whitebeard and Shanks too of the Yonko. I'm not sure about the other two. Then there's the old pirate king, Roger, and his first mate Rayleigh. I think that's all. Sabo replied while scratching his chin in thought. You forgot Hancock. Luffy peeked in cheerfully. Sabo bit his knuckle to keep from laughing out loud. Yes, there's also the empress of the all-female Kuja warriors. She's quite notorious for hating all things male. Zoro and Nami cocked their head in confusion, not understanding what's so funny. Luffy was highly surprised. Really? Hancock's always been nice to me. Sabo coughed into his hand in an attempt to keep himself from cackling. You'll understand if you ever run into them. That poor woman. He giggled while Luffy whined in confusion. Everyone. Someone screamed outside. The quartet turned to look out the window. Usopp was running down the street screaming his lungs out. Pirates are coming to attack tomorrow. Run for your lives. The group watched as people started coming out of their houses armed with spatulas, skillets and broomsticks. They started arguing with Usopp, who tried to convince people that there were honest-to-God pirates planning on attacking tomorrow morning. Finally the villagers chased to aspiring sniper away, none too gently too. He seemed pretty convinced there will be pirates attacking tomorrow morning. Sabo commented. Don't worry your heads over it, dear guests. The group looked down their window to see the kindly landlady. He's been doing this for years. He runs around the town each morning without fail, screaming his head off about pirates attacking. The chubby lady chuckled. Although, he does usually do that in the morning instead of the evening. She tutted and went back to her sweeping. Luffy sucked his lips in thought. Usopp genuinely did seem to believe there is going to be tomorrow morning. Sabo spoke what Luffy was thinking. What makes you think that? Nami asked. I don't know what he's thinking, but he felt really scared. He replied. Anyway, let's go see what's going on. The group left the inn in a leisurely stroll, following where Luffy and Sabo claimed Usopp to be. They found him laughing loudly at his three friends. Ha 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 ha, I just said it because I hate that butler. He laughed uproariously, though if you listened closely you could detect it being without any humor. The three boys didn't look amused much. I don't like the captain doing that. Ninjin said. Me neither. Piemon nodded. Even though that butler is a jerk, captain shouldn't make up stories to hurt anyone. Tamanegi added. The three boys left to have dinner, passing the four pirates with a nod of greeting. Let's take a look at that wound of yours. Sabo nodded towards the arm Usopp had been hiding behind his back and pulled out a first aid kit from his top hat. They patched him up and put a bit more distance between the village and themselves. So, wanna tell us what's really going on? Luffy asked. Usopp sighed and stared at his toes. Kurohot Olas was really the captain of Black Cat Pirates, Captain Kuro. He wanted to quit being a pirate without the Marines after his tale, so he made an elaborate plan where a fake was executed in his stead. He's planning on having Kaya hypnotized to write a will leaving everything to him. And then, kill her. Because I'm a regular liar no one will believe me. Usopp gripped his trousers tightly and shook all over with emotion. Everyone thinks tomorrow will be a peaceful day. Usopp stopped shaking and he jumped to his feet in determination. So I will make sure my truth will actually become a lie. Luffy grinned. Admirable determination. But, can you really fight them alone? Sabo asked. Usopp jumped. You're saying I'm scared of them. I'm not scared, even though they got more people. He screamed with tears in his eyes. His knees were shaking. Luffy's grin widened. Usopp started beating his quaking knees in a futile attempt to still them. Stop staring like that. Of course I'm scared. What normal person wouldn't be? Luffy's grin widened to an almost impossible width. Which is why we'll fight alongside with you tomorrow. He declared. Because that's what Nakama are for. Usopp looked at Luffy with wide eyes. Nakama, but I'm not even part of your crew. The grin on Luffy's face looked like it could literally split his face in half. Say that again tomorrow after the battle. Sabo and Zoro grinned. After all, the bonds forged with blood were often the strongest. Being as the island was on a cliff-like setting, there were two possibilities where the pirates could attack from, and Luffy and Sabo located them and picked the more obvious route, even though Usopp believed it to be the other. The slopes on either side of the island were the only way in because the steep cliffs that otherwise surrounded the isle, so Usopp naturally believed it to be the slope closer to the village. The brothers however claimed that the pirates docked near the other one. So to ease Usopp's mind they poured oil all over the first slope, making crossing it even more difficult than climbing the cliff. By the way, how come you didn't know before that there were pirates nearby? Nami asked the obvious question in Zoro's head. They were waiting on their ship too far away. Luffy replied. There's a limit how far you can sense. The farther and more accurately you want, the more concentration you need. Sabo added. Could you have sensed them if you had concentrated harder? Usopp asked. He had been filled in about Haki by Nami, just to kill time. The brothers shrugged. Possibly. Depending how much our distance is. Sabo said. My immediate sensing range is about half a kilometer. If I concentrate I can stretch out nearly to 10. Sabo can sense even farther. Luffy added. It is possible to have that Haki fail in battle though, if you get flustered enough to lose your concentration. Sabo informed. Speaking of battle, we have to be really strong to hold our ground with an entire crew of pirates. So, what are your skills? Usopp asked suddenly. I cut. Zoro. I stretch. Luffy. I steal. Nami. I pound. Sabo. I hide. Usopp. You fight too. Zoro and Nami yelled ill-tempered. Actually, hiding is not bad idea with how his skills are at this point. Luffy placated his nakama. Zoro and Nami looked at Air Captain as if he lost his marbles. What my brother is trying to say is that snipers, as good as they are in ranged combat, are generally very weak in hand-to-hand. Sabo took up explaining, especially Usopp right now as he is. Luffy added bluntly, making Usopp hung his head in embarrassment. I'm definitely going to have to teach him what to do if cornered, but right now it would be way better for all of us if he were to hide someplace safe to take out the enemy. So right now the question remains. The brim of Luffy's hat cast a shadow over his eyes ominously, making Usopp feel shivers. Are you willing to do what needs to be done? What do you mean? Usopp asked, even though he had a feeling he knew where this was going. Are you willing to take a life in order to save a life? The shivers turned chilling, making Usopp's blood run cold. I don't necessarily need to. Right, I can just stun them, he said, his voice shaking. The group didn't say anything for a while, just stood quietly. The only sound that could be heard were the waves of the sea and the wind in the treetops. Yes, you can just do that. Luffy started, his voice grave. But then they will keep getting up, and up, until they have reached their goal. Usopp's fists twitched. You'll probably be dead, as they'll probably find your hiding place. Now they clenched. That is if you're lucky. Some men really like torturing their victims. Cold sweat broke on Usopp's face. Then they'll storm the village, burning down all the houses. Cold sweat spread all over his body now. Finally, they'll reach the mansion. Usopp squeezed his eyes shut. They'll go inside her bedroom, where she's still sleeping, or already awake from all the noise coming from the village. Usopp started shaking. Shut up, he whispered weakly. I wonder what methods they'll use to get her to sign the will. Shut up. Usopp grounded, this time more loudly. I personally doubt they'll kill her after she's done. Men oftentimes get lonely out on the sea, so they'll probably. Shut up. Shut up. Rip open her white nightgown and proceed to. Shut up. Usopp threw a wild punch at Luffy. The fist connected with his jaw and the force made him fall over. Usopp grabbed the fallen captain by his red shirt. Those scumbags will never lay even one finger on her. I won't let them. If I have to I will kill them all. He screamed madly, tears streaming down his face. Luffy smirked and got on his feet again. Yes, that's the determination that will save her. But don't forget that we're here as well. We will stand by you to protect what you hold dear. Luffy nodded. Now let's go to the other slope. The group turned to walk but then Luffy stopped suddenly. Oh, and, he turned towards Usopp and punched him in the jaw, making the young sharpshooter fly a couple of meters away with a yelp of pain and surprise. Now we're even. The most surprised person of the group was Sabo. He had never in a million years thought he'd see Luffy mimic Garp's fist of love. It seems like he already saw his nakama as family. Zoro, Sabo and Luffy watched patiently as the ship with a black cat figurehead pulled up right in front of the slope. Nami and Usopp had hidden somewhere nearby. Usopp was armed with his usual slingshot and also the flintlock pistol he recently inherited. Hey, that ship's kind of cute, Luffy said as the enemy captain's voice faintly carried over giving his motivational speech. You like it? Sabo asked. I've always kind of liked felines. They're delicious. Zoro's sweat dropped. Luffy apparently is content to eat every kind of meat as long as it isn't straight-out cannibalism. Suddenly Sabo sat up straight and turned towards the village. Something wrong? Zoro asked. There's a person with a heavy injury in Kaya's mansion. Sabo replied. That girl? Zoro shouted with a start. No, it's someone else. But he's barely hanging in there. It's probably the work of that butler. Go help him. We've got things under control here, Luffy said without a hint of worry. Sabo nodded and disappeared towards the village. Luffy jumped up from the ground and walked into the middle of the slope, directly on the pirates' path. Zoro followed his captain's lead. Sabo arrived by the mansion stealthily by the time the sky had already taken a blue color. He spied the butler sitting on the front steps of the mansion. He looked impatient. However, Sabo wasn't interested in the bespectacled man. His interests laid in the injured middle-aged man inside the house. He snuck around the house, careful not to be noticed, entered through a window and hurried towards the passed-out servant. As he kneeled next to him he noticed the evil butler walking out of the estate towards the slope. Well, one less thing to worry about. Sabo turned his attention towards the lamb-like person. He gently turned him around after making sure there was no damage to his neck. He ripped the shredded front shirt completely off to assess the damage. The cuts were shallow enough to stop the majority of bleeding as the man lied face down, which is why he hadn't bled to death already. The wound had already started to clot, however now that there was no pressure Sabo had to hurry up with the bandaging. As he was working the suffering man became conscious. Who? He rasped through pain. SSSH, don't try to speak, sir. You've lost quite a lot of blood, so any dizziness you may feel is to be expected after the searing pain subsides a bit. I recommend that you take it easy for now, Hitsuji-san. The village, Miss Kaya, the man rasped through pain. No need to worry, sir. My brother's got everything under control. Both the village and its princess are safe. Sabo placated. Not a moment too soon after Sabo was finished bandaging, the door opened and the blonde mistress of the manor entered. She took in the sight of her bloody servant and screamed. Mary, what happened? Who did this to you? She turned to look at the swallowtail-wearing young man fearfully. Miss Kaya, you're really safe. Thank God. The servant, Mary, rasped. Really safe? What are you talking about? Kurohadol. Mary's eyes filled with tears of frustration. Mary tearfully went on to explain how he was assaulted by Kurohadol, how he was really a pirate, and how no one believed poor Usopp as he tried to warn everybody. Is everyone else in the mansion safe? There's no one else in the mansion. They all left for vacation yesterday evening. Miss Kaya, everyone in this village is in danger of those pirates. If Kurohadol's goal is your treasure, then you should just give it to him. It's not worth risking everyone for. Kaya nodded through her tears. Yes, I will go and talk to Kurohadol now. Sorry to interrupt, but your plan is actually flawed. Sabo cut in before the girl could go on the suicide mission. From what Usopp told us, Kurohadol or Kuro would not let Miss Kaya live in any scenario. If he had been just interested in the money, he would have attacked the village 3 years ago as a pirate. He wants off the wanted list, so he faked his own capture and thus death. A friend of his is a hypnotist, and he's planning on having the young mistress write a will leaving everything to him in her demise. Just not to be suspicious, the village needs to be pillaged as well. Sabo rained on their parade. What am I supposed to do? Everyone will, Kaya cried. Don't worry, my brother and his crew are taking care of it as we speak. Sabo said with a kind smile. This is Captain Kuro and the Black Cat's pirates we're talking about. What can just a few kids do? Mari cried, pessimistic. Just my brother alone is enough to beat them all blindfolded. Have faith. Kaya stood up and started leaving the room. Where are you going, miss? Sabo asked, but he had a feeling he already knew. I'm going to Kurohadol. Oh no, you're not. You're so weak you can barely stand. I'm afraid you'd just be in the way, madam. I can't just sit tight and do nothing. I'm going. Sabo and Kaya argued back and forth until Sabo finally gave in. He lifted the girl into his arms bridal style. She started protesting immediately. Stop complaining. You can barely stand by yourself. My brother and probably Usopp will be pissed at me as it is for allowing you to wander out. Just sit tight and let me carry you. Kaya did as told with a blush. The young man's coat was unfastened and therefore she was tightly pressed against his bare chest. It's the first time she's been next to a male's bare skin that was not her immediate family. Naturally she was very embarrassed. Sabo didn't notice or expertly ignored it. Luffy had taken care of the masses by swinging his leg and letting the force it created in the air blow the bulk away. Then Captain Django, who apparently was a hypnotist, hypnotized his underlings into thinking their wounds were healed and they had 10 times the strength as before. Unfortunately 10 times the strength on each individual still was not enough. Then 2 weird guys jumped off the ship and made to attack. Luffy declared himself bored and Zoro offered to take this round. The Nyaban brothers, as they were apparently called, bluffed about their strength, and thus managed to steal 2 of Zoro's swords. Luffy thought it was hilarious. If you want I'll take one off your hands. Luffy offered as the 2 black cats, scratched, at Zoro. It would be embarrassing if I'd have to force my captain into fighting such weak foe. Zoro replied. Luffy's smile widened into a grin at Zoro's answer. As you wish. Suddenly a gunshot was heard and the skinny brother, Sham, fell over dead as a bullet pierced his brain. The husky brother, Butchie, momentarily overtaken by shock and grief, was cut down by Zoro a moment later. What is going on here? A dangerous voice asked suddenly. Everyone turned towards the top of the slope where Captain Kuro stood. The sky has been bright for some time now. Why have you not acted according to plan? He grounded ill-temperedly. Kuro's eyes took in the dead Sham, the deathly injured Butchie, Django and the beaten crew. Yo! Luffy raised his hand in greeting. Kuro looked at the 2 young enemy pirates dispassionately. He then turned to nervous-looking Django. These kids are not ordinary. He tried to defend himself. Kurohadol. Everyone turned towards the feminine voice. Kaya had arrived in Sabo's arms. Somewhere near in the bushes Usopp flushed slightly in jealousy. Sabo, why the hell did you bring her here? Luffy yelled at his brother. Sorry, Lu, but she was very persistent. So then, I could have just let her walk by herself with her body as frail as it is or lend her a hand. You could have just knocked her out. I have no problem beating up women, but I can't in good grace raise a hand against a lady. Sabo scoffed. Of course by women, he meant female warriors. And unlike you I can't knock people unconscious just by glaring at them. He finished with an eye roll. Kuro and Kaya proceeded to converse. Kaya asked Kuro to leave everybody alone, but Kuro only confirmed what Sabo had explained. Kaya was reduced to tears. Django, I will finish these kids. You will make Kaya write a will. After that, kill her. Kuro said darkly after their conversation had ended. Roger that. Django replied and made a way towards Kaya. The next thing he knew he was being held above ground by the neck by Luffy. Oh my. You didn't think I would actually let you harm her, did you? Luffy rammed Django face first into the stone ground, effectively knocking him unconscious. Zoro. Luffy said to his first mate. This guy would be kind of a challenge to a swordsman of your skill. You won't be bored to fight this one. Roger that. Zoro replied with a grin, copying Django's earlier words on purpose. Suddenly Luffy disappeared and reappeared next to his brother. Since you're going to kill us, why not start with our swordsman? We won't leave from this spot. That's a promise. Kuro, in already an extremely bad mood with things going awry, didn't argue but readied his claws to attack Zoro immediately. The battle that ensued between the two blade wielders was quite even, but in the end Zoro's fire reigned supreme. Just as Kuro lay defeated before an injured Zoro, Django finally came to. Not realizing his former captain was defeated, he panicked at the sight of Kaya and sent his chakram flying at her. The chakram was intercepted by Usopp's bullet, making it veer out of course and harmlessly into the ground. A bit less dangerous pachinko was shot at Django's already bruised head, knocking him out cold again. Come now, Lu, no need to be so depressed. Sabo attempted to cheer up his depressed brother helplessly. After the battle was over, the beaten crew made a hasty retreat with their ship. Luffy had been feeling gloomy since he realized he let the one ship he found cool away. The only plus side is Nami's little excursion on board. However, even she wasn't satisfied with the money she found since they let the ship get away. Is finding a ship really that difficult? Usopp asked. Usopp had freshly joined the Straw Hats after the fight with Kuro the day before. The gang had given him time to say his farewells to his friends and disband his own kitty pirate group. When they finally arrived at the docks, where their boats were, they were pleasantly surprised by Kaya and her bandaged servant Mary. However, the most magnificent sight was the caravel with a lamb figurehead. Kaya looked at the band of pirates before her with a kind smile. You have done so much for both the village and I. As a thank you, I would like to give you this ship as a present. Luffy's eyes and mouth were wide open with wonder. It's so adorable. Are you really giving it to us? He asked with stars in his eyes. Yes, please accept it. Kaya replied courteously. Mary went on to explain how the steering and other operatives worked on it, but only Nami and Sabo paid him attention, as Zoro didn't feel the need to know it himself, and Luffy decided to more or less learn as they went. Such a beauty. It's even nicer than that kitty ship. I especially love the figurehead. Luffy giggled to himself as he admired his new home. I've prepared anything you would need to set sail. Kaya said with a kind smile. Aw, thanks. You're really being the awesomest princess in all of East Blue. Luffy cheered and gave Kaya a one-armed, but powerful, bear hug. All of the pirates, sans Usopp, climbed aboard. The young sharpshooter stayed on coast to properly say goodbye to his not-so-secret crush. It all went well, with blushing and shy giggling until Kaya asked Usopp how she could ever thank him enough for all he's done for her. That was when Luffy, ever the tactful one, shouted from aboard to lay one on him, as he would probably appreciate that form of gratitude the most. Since then the goodbye felt awkward as hell. The other pirates and Mary stuffed their knuckles in their mouths to prevent laughing out loud. Luffy never knew he said anything embarrassing. Disclaimer: this story do not belong to me. The author is Second Round by Rasberry Joe. Chapter 4, Recruiting Some More, Part 1. For a day or so Luffy was even more upbeat than usual, believe it or not. He was so happy to finally have his very own pirate vessel that he ended up forcing his nakama to sing Bink's sake. He insisted that if they couldn't get a musician right away they needed to sing by themselves. Unfortunately for the three, Sabo didn't disagree with his little brother, so they had no effective backup. Going Merry had been their ship for about 12 hours and the sun had recently set behind the horizon, though the sky was still pinkish. Now then, Nami exclaimed and hit a bottle of sake on the table. Usopp. The aforementioned sharpshooter jumped at the loud bang sound bottle hitting table made, but it was the evil glint in the navigator's eyes that made him gulp. She looked as evil as a devil after his soul, or Nami after money. This pirate crew has a tradition, she declared loudly. Every new recruit has to challenge the captain to a drinking competition before they can fully be a part of the gang. She declared loudly. Drinking competition? Usopp stuttered nervously. What's the matter, never been drunk before? Zoro asked with a smirk, lounging against a wall, one eye closed. Sure I have. Usopp insisted a bit too strongly. Have you ever even drunk alcoholic beverages before? Sabo asked, finding Usopp's nervousness a bit strange. One really should be nervous if they knew about Luffy's crazy alcohol tolerance, but he highly doubted the sniper was aware of that. I idiot. Of course I have. Usopp nearly screamed. Liar, everybody thought. Well then, Usopp-kun, will you challenge me? Luffy asked, as cool as a cucumber, if it hadn't been for the maniacal grin. Usopp gulped before stomping his foot on the table in a heroic pose. This Usopp-sama, king of snipers, challenges the pirate captain Luffy to a drinking duel. He exclaimed dramatically. Yosha, let's get it on, then. Luffy replied with a grin that made Usopp nervous again. As Luffy and Usopp downed shots alternatively, the other three made bets on the outcome. They didn't make bets on who would win, as that's kind of obvious, but rather how well and how long Usopp would hold on before succumbing. About an hour later, Usopp fell off his seat with a snore. The winner of the bets, Zoro. Nami and Sabo had too heavily relied on the fact that Usopp was an absolute novice when it came to drinking. Zoro took that into consideration as well, but he also believed his genes to at least somewhat help him not be completely pathetic. He had been right. The next day Usopp was running around play pretending to be a dread pirate captain defending his ship from enemy pirates. Who would have thought the boy was resistant to hangovers? Ah, come on, can't you guys pay attention to people? He pouted when he noticed no one was paying him any mind. Nami was busy examining some of her charts and maps, Zoro and Sabo were bonding over a shared favorite pastime, napping, and Luffy was busy doing something on his own, very quiet for once. Quiet means something very dangerous, right? What are you doing? Usopp asked the young captain. I'm trying to design our pirate mark, but for some reason I can't seem to find one I like. Luffy replied with a pout, looking like a kicked puppy. That got the attention of other members. They crowded over Luffy and took a look at some of his sketch designs. And it wasn't a wonder he didn't like any of his designs, his artistic skills were atrocious. Usopp tutted, you should have come to me with this. Don't you know I'm a genius painter? He went on about bragging his having 50 years of experience with a brush, only to have it backfire as he got called an old man with grandchildren as result. So Usopp ended up designing a pirate mark that clearly represented himself. He got hit over the head by Zoro and Luffy for his troubles. His second design of crossbones and skull wearing a straw hat was a lot more acceptable. In fact, Luffy liked it so much he ordered Usopp to also paint it on their sails as well. Shortly after they were done with creating the mark, Luffy carried a big box of cannonballs up to the deck. Yo, Usopp-kun, he shouted cheerfully. Have you ever shot a cannonball before? Usopp, who was taking a rest after all that paintwork, sat up and looked a bit baffled. Cannonballs. Yup. As our sharpshooter I hope you're good at shooting a cannonball as well. Because I know I suck at it. Luffy exclaimed happily, not the least bit ashamed to admit his personal faults. That's not completely true, Luffy. You're not so bad when you throw them. Sabo joined in on their conversation. Oh yeah, I can do that. A brief sad glint made an appearance in Luffy's eyes before it disappeared. Usopp wrote it off as a trick of light. Was Luffy even capable of sadness? So, how about it? Let's see if you need some practice. Luffy turned his attention back to Usopp. If we head to south a little there should be a perfect place to practice. Nami added in her own 2 cents. And what did Sabo mean by, throw? She asked skeptically. Throw as in literally. Your strength is augmented dramatically when using haki. Sabo explained offhandedly. Although even without using haki Luffy's capable of throwing stuff as heavy as cannonballs. He muttered more to himself but Nami still heard him. She sweat dropped. These guys were unreal. Cool. Are you going to be teaching us soon? Usopp asked enthusiastically. Well, I was thinking about letting you guys relax and get used to Mary a bit more before I start the drilling. Luffy said thoughtfully while scratching his chin. Drilling. Both Usopp and Nami thought nervously. About half an hour later they reached a tiny island. It wasn't actually an island as much as just a few meters of rock with moss on top sticking out of the ocean. Alright then, let's see how good you are. Luffy shouted. Or how much luck you have. Sabo muttered quietly. Luck was very much necessary in Grand Line 2, particularly the new and uninfluential crews. And as luck, or skill, would have it Usopp's aim was dead on. Oesum, Luffy exclaimed loudly. You're awesome, Usopp-kun. Now, don't let him get a big head, Lu. The pirates headed inside in an attempt to find something to eat. This reminds me, we have 3 positions that absolutely must be filled. Luffy said as he munched on an asparagus. What? Just because he adores meat more than healthy doesn't mean he hates other food. He still eats his veggies. Yes kiddies, if you want to grow into strong boys and girls you need to eat your greens. Asterisk. You're right, the kitchen's so nice. If you pay me I'll do it. Nami said slyly. What are you on about? Navigation's too important a position at Grand Line, we can't afford you to hold any extra positions. Besides the treasury has joint ownership with everyone, so technically I can't pay you anything you don't already own. Aside from a cook, who else are absolutely necessary? Zoro cut in. A doctor and a musician. Luffy exclaimed. I want to get the musician first. Then Luffy looked gloomy for a moment. Though what I want has to take back seat to what we need for now. Then he brightened up again, as if nothing happened. Who we need the most is either a doctor or a cook. If possible I'd like to recruit both before we enter the Grand Line. Cook is an obvious choice, but trust me, in that ocean we won't last very long without professional medical care. Any idea where to start looking? Nami asked, as she was the one who would have to get them there. I don't know where we could start looking for a doctor, but a chef we are definitely getting from a floating restaurant called Barati. Unfortunately neither me nor Sabo know where it is. I'll go through my maps as soon as possible. Nami nodded. Suddenly a crash was heard from the outer deck. Come out, you filthy pirates. A muffled voice raged. Huh, when did someone sneak up on us? Luffy thought with a mildly surprised look. 1, 2, 1.5, he muttered, sounding confused, as he made his way outside. Who are you? He asked the stranger. Silence, pirate. It doesn't matter who I am. With an enraged roar he swung his sword at Luffy, who dodged it almost lazily. I have taken the heads of countless pirates. How dare you, a no-name pirate, kill my partner? The male roared and tried to attack Luffy again, but only managed to nick some wood from the boat as his swing was evaded. I don't know who you are, and so far I've had no bone to pick with you. But now you've damaged my ship. At the word, ship, Luffy rammed a fist into the man's gut, making the man topple over in pain. The force of the punch made him lose his breath and a bile rose to his throat. At that moment Zoro came out of the kitchen. Isn't that Johnny? He mused out loud as he looked at the pathetic form of Johnny. Zoro Aniki. Johnny wheezed as he tried to get some oxygen in his lungs again. What are you doing here alone? Where's Yosaku? Zoro asked. Johnny teared up and showed them another male on the dinghy next to their ship. A few days ago he was still healthy, but then out of the blue he passed out. His teeth started to fall out and old wounds reopened. We took a rest at that island and then, we were shot at by a cannon. Usopp freaked out while Luffy rubbed the back of his neck sheepishly. Usopp bowed lowly. I'm so very sorry. He apologized desperately. It's okay. Since you apologized I won't get the police to arrest you. Johnny wept and Luffy rolled his eyes. Hello, pirates. And this guy called himself a bounty hunter. Didn't you sense them at the island? Zoro turned accusing gaze at Luffy. Sabo was suspiciously absent. I could have had I concentrated. The island was just about on the edge of my sensing range, but unless you specifically concentrate it's hard to tell the difference between humans and animals the further away they are. Luffy explained. Unless they're freakishly strong. Then they stand out like a miniature supernova. Sabo made an appearance carrying a bowl of various citrusy fruits. Oh, Luffy shouted as he took in the bowl in the ill man's condition. That's why it looked so familiar. Scurvy, right, he exclaimed, extremely pleased with himself. Sabo nodded. Luffy explained to Zoro, Johnny and Usopp how and why a few of his old nakama got scurvy shortly after arriving at Grand Line. Fortunately no one died. Nami came to join their grouping and helped Sabo lift the ill man to a semi-sitting position to get him to swallow the juices in the optimal way. Soon Yosaku was on his feet again, surprising everyone with the knowledge about scurvy, as scurvy normally wasn't healed that fast. Their conversation turned back to a chef and how badly necessary he or she really is. Johnny recommended Bharati that Luffy wanted to visit anyway. Fortunately Johnny actually knew the coordinates. Bharati is northeast from here, approximately 2 or 3 days away. However you have to be pretty careful since it is pretty close to Grand Line and therefore often visited by pirates. I've heard a rumor that Hawkeyes frequents that place as well. Johnny explained and Zoro gripped his katanas in anticipation. Mihawk, really? I didn't know he leaves Grand Line too often. Luffy exclaimed in surprise. Are you certain it was Hawkeyes? Sabo was skeptical. You know him? Zoro asked, highly surprised. The two brothers nodded. We're acquainted, however he's more of a friend rather than our own. Sabo explained. He's Shanks' drinking buddy. Also Mihawk has the biggest crush on him. Poor guy, Shanks has absolutely no idea. Luffy giggled. Hawkeyes is gay. Zoro exclaimed, very surprised. I don't think he cares what he fucks, as long as he gets to be on top. Sabo said nonchalantly while eyeing Zoro critically. You're not thinking of challenging him, are you? And what if I am? Zoro scoffed. Both Luffy and Sabo went very still, any sign of humor vanished. Zoro, as an order from your captain, you are forbidden from issuing a challenge to Dracula, Hawkeye's Mihawk. Luffy ordered with a severe tone. The Santoryu practitioner started protesting angrily immediately. His shouts came to a sudden stop when his knees gave out and he fell to the floor. The only thing keeping him from completely passing out was the support he got by gripping his swords. His breathing was labored and he literally felt like shadowy darkness was squeezing the life out of him. Mihawk would barely even be bothered by what you are now feeling. Challenging him as you are now is like someone who has never picked up a sword challenging you. I'm not exaggerating, Zoro. You are far from ready to take him on. Luffy stopped suffocating Zoro with haki, but the aftershock was still on the swordsman. Johnny, who had been standing close to Zoro, was passed out. Nami and Usopp were cowering behind Sabo, whose body seemed to protect the pair from the brunt of Luffy's tangible ambition. Luffy took Zoro's chin in his hand and made the swordsman look him in the eyes. I'm not trying to keep you from your dream, Zoro. I'm trying to make sure it will come to be. Until you at least master haki and become strong enough to take my own haki head on, you are not ready to face him yet. But in time, with my help, you will be. Do you understand, Zoro? Zoro grit his teeth. Yes, Captain. He grounded out finally. Good. Okay then, we should revive our two stowaways. Nami shouted suddenly in an attempt to disperse the tense atmosphere. It turned out only Johnny had passed out from Luffy's haki. Yosaku was still suffering from scurvy and had passed out naturally. They put the man into bed so he could recover in peace. That evening over the dinner table, Luffy brought up another subject he had been meaning to discuss. "Oh yeah, Nami-chan. There's something I've wanted to ask you for some time." Nami turned away from her food to look at her captain. "Traditionally, since you're my first nakama, the title of first mate automatically belongs to you. However, if it's alright, I'd like Zoro be the one to have it." The others stopped eating as well, now interested in the crucial moment of Straw Hat's history. "Really? Why?" Nami replied, mildly insulted. Was she not more qualified than the aloof swordsman? "Nothing against you, it's just that I think we sympathize with one another a lot. The job of a first mate is to make decisions if the captain itself is unavailable, like gravely injured and resting, and I think Zoro would make decisions that are the most similar to my own. Besides, being the navigator, you'll get to boss us around on a regular basis anyway." Nami mulled it over. "Alright, I don't mind, as long as he doesn't get more treasure than me." She finally decided. "But you'll still have to honor our bet," she added while glancing at Zoro, who only rolled his eyes. The wind had been good and Baratie had made its appearance over the horizon in 2 days. Luffy was excited and tried to cop a feel at potential nakama, but instead found something else. He rushed to right side of the ship and gazed the sea with the look. "Nami-chan," he called. "What is it, Captain?" The navigator answered lazily. "There's a marine ship incoming from starboard. Their goal seems to be the restaurant," Luffy informed. "Really? What do you want to do?" Nami required as she took a peek with her spyglass. "There's no one worthy to fight, and I want to get to Baratie without a hassle if possible. Change course to take a small detour, so we can anchor on the other side of the restaurant. If they notice us and attack anyway, we'll deal with it." Nami nodded and gave the instruction to turn slightly to port. They made it to the restaurant slightly later than the marine ship. They used Johnny and Yosaku's dinghy to get to the other vessel. As they were about to tie up the boat, they heard a crash inside. As they actually went inside, they were greeted by an unusual sight. A chic blonde man was holding another well-dressed man by the neck. "Oh, a fight," Zoro said with a smirk. "I'm liking this place already," Sabo said with a polite smile. Luffy barely even seemed to notice the tension. He just looked around for a free table. A chef walked into the room and spotted the blonde and his, customer. "Opponent. Victim. Sanji. What the hell do you think you are doing to the customer? Isn't that a marine lieutenant?" He raged at the blonde. "What do you want, shitty cook?" The blonde, Sanji, replied. "Hello. Is there a free table somewhere?" Luffy cut in buoyantly, not the least bit concerned or bothered by the intense confrontation. Honestly, he didn't even seem to notice it. "Welcome, Squid Face. Let me get you to a table right away. How many bastards do you have?" the man said with a creepy friendly face. "5 people, Luffy replied like the wording had been the most natural in the world. The chef, Patty, showed them to a table. "Hey, can I speak with the owner? I want to ask him a favor," Luffy said when he was seated. Patty blinked in slight surprise before shrugging. Patty went back to yelling at Sanji, who had to be bodily restrained from killing the marine lieutenant who had just threatened to shut the place down. It was at that moment that the owner of Baratie, head chef Zeph, walked into the scene. "Sanji, were you fighting in my restaurant again, you ingrate?" he roared, ill-temperedly. He then proceeded to slug the blonde chef in the face with his wooden leg. He didn't stop there, he also slugged the esteemed customer, and told him to get the fuck out. The chef's quarrel was only interrupted by the main entrance door slamming open. A bloody, low-ranked marine was at the entrance. "Lieutenant Full Body, this is an emergency," he screamed urgently. "Pirate Krieg's crewman has escaped. I'm very sorry, but 7 of us have been injured," he reported. The lieutenant looked flustered. "How is that possible? He was starving when we caught him 3 days ago and we haven't fed him since," he shouted, making the already frightened people even more scared. They whispered, "Don Krieg," in absolute terror. The marine was about to apologize again, but before he could finish he was shot from behind. People screamed and stood up from their seats as a battered-looking pirate made his way inside the vessel slowly. He passed the lieutenant lazily without even glancing at him and sat down on a vacant table. "I don't care what it is, but get me something to eat." "This is a restaurant, right?" he said with a hoarse voice. He had either been screaming a lot recently, or he was really parched. "Welcome, Squid Face," Patty said with the same creepy friendly face he had greeted Luffy with. "But we'll be expecting you to pay. Do you have enough money?" he inquired. The newcomer pointed a pistol at Patty's face. "Do you take lead? 'Cause I ain't got no money." As soon as he said that, Patty rammed his fists at him with a horizontal strike, breaking the chair the pirate occupied along with it. Of course the owner complained over a broken chair rather than the guest who got slugged by an employee. Luffy noticed that the smartly dressed cook left for the kitchen as Patty proceeded to beat up the starving pirate. When he was done he gave the gayest curtsy to applauding customers before throwing the pirate outside none too gently. Out of curiosity Luffy went along, but not before telling Sabo to order food for him too. Luffy watched as the chef, Sanji, put a plate of seafood rice in front of the battered male and told him to eat up. Jin's eyes took a delighted glow before he started devouring the rice. He thanked Sanji and praised his cooking with tears in his eyes. Luffy grinned widely. Found you, he said to himself. The pirate and Sanji heard him though, and both looked up at the young pirate captain who had been spying on them over the railing. Hey, cook, care to join my pirate crew? He asked cheerfully and jumped over the railing and sat down next to Sanji. You're a pirate? Sanji asked, mildly surprised. Luffy nodded. Well, whatever. Though, I wouldn't recommend starting any fights here. The owner of this place used to be a pretty infamous pirate himself. The blonde cook warned. I know. Red leg Zeph. That's why Pops recommended this place to recruit a cook for my own crew. Luffy snickered happily. So, how about it? Will you join? Sorry, I have a reason to stay here. Sanji said not unkindly. Nope, I refuse your refusal. Luffy replied immediately, making Sanji sweat drop. Huh, he said in confusion. I want you and that's how it's going to be. The young pirate claimed firmly. Hey now. Sanji protested, though he got the feeling anything he would say would be futile. Excuse me for interrupting, Jin said hesitantly. My name is Jin, I'm a member of the Krieg Pirates. You said you're a pirate too, right? What's your goal? He asked without showing much emotion. One Piece. I'm heading to Grand Line once I get this stubborn chef to join my crew. Oi, Sanji protested, and maybe a doctor, I'm not really sure. It was subtle but Luffy immediately noticed the look in Jin's eyes. The look that crawled its way into every pirate's soul once they had been totally annihilated. He had seen it enough to recognize the signs. It was likely Jin's crew went to Grand Line and wasn't able to cut it. As you're still looking for a chef, it must mean your crew is still quite small. Unless your cook quit recently. He stated cautiously. Yep, including me and him there's 5 people. Luffy exclaimed while poking at Sanji. The hell are you including me? Sanji protested, which both Luffy and Jin ignored. You look like a decent kid, so I'll give you a piece of advice. Jin proceeded to warn Luffy not to go to Grand Line, ever. The haunted look in his eyes looked more prominent than ever. So, you know a lot about Grand Line then, huh? Luffy asked slyly. A look of pure terror was visible from Jin's gaze. And no, absolutely nothing. That's why it's so terrifying. He stuttered forcefully. Liar. Luffy sing-songed. I know that look you have. Every pirate who got chewed out by Grand Line has it. So, how long did you last? What finally got to you? Was it the weather or another crew? If it was the weather then you really suck and have no chance, but if it was another crew there's a chance you just had shitty luck. Some people are freaky powerful like that. Luffy babbled, not paying any mind that Jin started shaking. It was neither the weather nor another crew, it was, I'm still not sure if I didn't just dream it, it was just one man. He rasped. One man. Luffy echoed and racked his brains. There weren't too many people who were powerful enough to completely fuck up an entire crew, least of all lone traveling ones. He came out of nowhere and started slicing up our ships like they were made of paper. I can never forget those eyes. You ran into Mihawk. Well don't worry, you just had a really shitty break. Not everyone in Grand Line's as strong as he is. Trust me, he's one of the true elites. There's only about maybe 24 others in the world that could rival his strength. Jin closed his eyes and shook his head. Do you have any medical knowledge, Jin? Luffy asked out of the blue. Not much, just the elementary stuff. Jin replied, a bit baffled by the random change of subject. Luffy pouted before cheering up a moment later. Really? That's a shame. Well, but do you want to join my crew anyway? He asked with an upbeat tone. Sorry, but I will not leave my old captain. Jin replied while still gripped by mild shock. Is that so? That's a shame. I really would have liked to have you with my crew. Your fighting level's not overly shabby, and your potential is very widely untapped. Luffy declared more weird things that baffled his companions. How do you think that? Jin asked skeptically. Oh, I can tell. Luffy replied simply. At that moment Zeph made an appearance. And Sanji shooed Jin to a boat. Jin felt guilty that Sanji would get into trouble for letting him eat for free, but Sanji only shrugged it off and threw the plate and glass overboard, claiming that they no longer had any evidence now. Zeph watched quietly as Jin thanked Sanji from the bottom of his heart and bowed deeply in gratitude. He waited as Jin had been sent off before shouting at Sanji. Sanji, get back to work. Yo, my name's Luffy and I'm a pirate. Do you mind if I take Sanji as my crew's cook? Luffy shouted back towards the retired pirate. Would you shut up already? Sanji yelled, really starting to lose his temper. Zeph only snorted. By all means, kid. I've been thinking I need to fake my own death to get that eggplant to finally fly the co-op. He groused gruffly. Like you could run this place without me. Besides I'm part owner. Sanji barked back. We don't need you here, you little brat. Zeph replied. What's that supposed to mean, old man? Zeph proceeded to say pretty hurtful things, but Sanji rebuffed his insults roughly and still insisted on never leaving. You certainly have your boss's blessing. Why don't you come with us? Luffy asked once their insults stopped and silent glaring began. I have my own reasons. Sanji said aloofly while igniting a cigarette. Please. Sanji was assaulted by puppy eyes of doom. His troubles were met by a kick on the head. Stop that. Only a lady is allowed to look that adorable. The disturbed chef shouted. Ah, you're no fun. Luffy pouted and grinned at the same time. Sanji was surprised by the other male's reaction. He had not kicked Luffy any lighter he kicks annoying males. While that kick was far from his maximum power, it was enough to send an average man into enough pain. However, this man looked like he might have as well have been poked with a feather. Sanji was very much aware that appearances could be highly misleading, but exactly how sturdy could this stick-like team be? Out of curiosity, kid, Zeph cut into their semi-friendly interaction. Do you have a dream you wish to pursue? Luffy was immediately distracted. One Piece, he declared the second time in under an hour. I'm going to be the king of pirates. Is that so? Zeph mumbled with a snort of amusement. You certainly have the ambition for it. There are not a whole lot of lone pirates who would be willing to voluntarily leave your old pirate crew. It was true. So far there was an astronomically small number of pirates who left Whitebeard's crew without a coffin. Though, that your brother chose to accompany you as well is the most shocking. Zeph added. Actually, Sabo's still part of Pop's crew. He's just chaperoning me until we get to New World. Luffy replied simply. That makes sense. But you're still calling him Pops as well. So, Zeph wasn't quite sure how to reply to that. It was true Whitebeard was the pirate closest to becoming the next pirate king, however he never had any real ambition towards that goal, and he was also getting to finally feel his age. Zeph had only met Whitebeard once. It was the meeting with that monstrously strong man that convinced Zeph to leave Grand Line behind. He had realized that, while he had been strong, he wasn't as strong as a truly magnificent New World pirate captain had to be. Considering he was the strongest fighter in his crew, he came to realize his crew's overall strength would only get all of them killed. Whitebeard was in a league of his own, a monster among monsters, as the saying goes. It was only because Whitebeard took to such liking towards Zeph's cooking that the pirate cook's crew wasn't obliterated. While Zeph's experience with Whitebeard had been relatively brief, he had gotten a pretty good idea what kind of a man the claimed greatest pirate alive was. Whitebeard wasn't a greedy man in the traditional sense. He enjoyed finer points of life like any other man, but he wasn't very much interested in accumulating wealth for himself like most captains. Instead of monetary valuables, Whitebeard treasured his family above all else. Every single member of his crew referred to Whitebeard as Pops, and actually viewed him as a protective father figure. In return, Whitebeard truly considered every member as one of his children. As mentioned before, Whitebeard wasn't interested in becoming the Pirate King or One Piece very much. Zeph remembered now quite clearly that the ones who were determined to crown Whitebeard were his nakama, but no, the captain himself. According to this logic, it wasn't all too surprising that Luffy still referred to Whitebeard as Pops, and it was very likely that Straw Hat was still considered family as well. Now the real questions were, was Whitebeard himself rooting for Luffy, and did the boy have what it takes? Zeph stroked his stiff chain-like braided mustache and thought. Well, he would mull over it at a later date. Right now he wondered how long it would take for the first person, himself excluded, to realize there were two Whitebeard pirates, former and current, in Baratie. That was something he definitely did not want to miss. The day passed for Luffy, alternating between eating and pestering Sanji with attempts to convince him into joining. To make matters worse, Luffy seemed to almost know where he was no matter where he hid, and if that wasn't bad enough, then how about Zeph giving Luffy permission to enter any part of the ship he desired, so Sanji couldn't even escape to staff-only rooms. When evening came, Luffy finally seemed to relent for the time being, but that was only because he seemed adamant about his crew relocating to their flagship. Sanji hoped against hope that he would just leave, but as karma would have it, he would probably return the next morning to begin his quest of pestering again. Luffy himself had an impressive reason of herding his crew back to Mary. It was time to start training. Now then, before we start our attempts of awakening your haki, there's one more thing I need to say. The captain declared. Zoro, Nami and Usopp were face to face with the two brothers standing next to each other. Sabo had taken his hat off and laid out some medical supplies just in case, though that certainly didn't make Nami or Usopp feel any more comfortable. Zoro on the other hand started to look more and more interested, but then again he was used to rigorous training sessions unlike the other two. He was wearing a small grin of anticipation as he listened to Luffy's words. Nami was leaning against the railings while trying to look aloof, but her nervousness was still somewhat visible. Usopp tried to do the same as Nami and succeeded even less. A person usually has one type of haki they're better at. Once they discover what it is, they tend to concentrate more to that area, but if you train hard, it is possible to achieve mastery of both. Luffy turned to Zoro. I don't care if your preferred is Kanbun Shoku. Mastering Busoshoku is a must for any truly good swordsman. If your preferred is Busoshoku anyway, it's up to you if you want to master Kanbun Shoku as well. He turned to Nami. On the other hand, you definitely need to master Kanbun Shoku. As our ship's navigator, all of us depend on you to keep us alive, so needing to be aware of your surroundings is super important for you. Whether you want to learn Busoshoku is up to you. And to Usopp. You have no excuses. I don't care what you say, mastering both is an absolute must. As our sniper you need to be aware where the enemy is from afar, even if you can't see them, but that all is not worth squat if you can't take them down. I'll be drilling you much harder than anyone else. The poor sharpshooter broke into cold sweat under the intense gaze he got from his captain. Now then, let's start. Luffy took Zoro away to explain what he was supposed to be feeling with a generous amount of examples. What exactly the examples were would be anyone's guess, but Zoro went to bed that night sorer than he'd been in a long time. Sabo took Nami and showed her meditation techniques. Usopp joined them, in hopes then the more level-headed of the pair of brothers was milder in his training than Luffy. The beginning was all fine. The two sat on the ground, eyes closed, and listened to Sabo's soothing voice as he instructed them to breathe and be as aware of their surroundings as they possibly could. It was all very relaxing, until Sabo knocked both of them over with his staff none too gently. As the two laid on the ground with bruises rapidly forming, Sabo was laughing and saying they needed to be aware of everything, especially enemies who bore malicious intents. Maybe he should have gone with Luffy instead. No, he did the right decision, considering how exhausted and battered the Santoryu practitioner looked before he hit the sack. The pupils didn't feel like they managed to accomplish anything that day. The brothers however assured them that actually awakening the powers was only the first, and most difficult, step. Luffy let his nakama have breakfast at Baratie before herding them back to Mary to continue training with Sabo. Luffy stayed aboard the restaurant to try and convince Sanji to join his crew. So far he was as successful as he'd been before. Lunch rolled around and Straw Hat Pirates came to eat and rest. Luffy asked Sabo to try talking to Sanji himself while he took up training. So Sabo went to see the blonde while he was having a smoke break. Hello. I don't believe we've been acquainted yet. My name is Sabo. I believe you know my brother, Luffy. Sabo introduced as he took a seat next to the chef. Hey, I'm Sanji. He asked you to try to convince me to join, didn't he? Sanji replied. Sabo let out a chuckle. Indeed he did ask me. Though I'm not sure how successful I can be. It may not seem so at first glance, but that little squirt is usually very successful at making people do what he wants. I'd go as far as to say it's a natural gift of his, but mainly it's because he's so damn stubborn. Do you mind if I bother you for a cigarette? Sanji shrugged and offered the brunette one. Sabo lit the stick and took a drag. So what exactly are you doing here if you know your attempts are futile? Sanji asked after a moment of silence. Futile? My dear man, whoever said futile? My brother would stay here for a full year to get what he wants if it would come to it, trust me on that. What I'm doing is trying to find a weak point I can exploit on you, and bother you for a cigarette or two. Sabo replied lightly. Sanji rolled his eyes. Your brother may be stubborn, but he's not as stubborn as me. As long as that shitty old man lives, I'm not setting foot off this restaurant. Don't set yourself up to eat you words, mate. Without noticing, Sabo and Sanji fell into a conversation. They discussed subjects such as women, all blue, Grand Line landmarks, most specifically Fishman Island, and mermaids. Their chat came to a halt when Zeph bonked Sanji on the head and hauled him back to the kitchen while cursing slackers. Sabo returned to Mary. The next 3 days passed the same way before anything changed from their normal routine. It was a misty morning and the Straw Hats were having breakfast with generous discount. They got the discount mostly because of Nami's feminine wiles, and Sanji was an uber pervert. Sanji wanted the men to pay and only have Nami get freebies, but since it turned out they had a joint ownership of money, he conceded to give them a half off. The only reason they didn't eat for free was because Zeph would have killed the young man otherwise. Zeph didn't mind the discounts mainly because the unbelievable appetite Luffy possessed. The crew wasn't disturbed in the least when people around them started panicking and crowding around windows. They didn't bat an eye when the fog started to lift, making a huge galleon visible through the windows. They didn't stop eating even when the doors opened and a huge man was practically carried in by Jin. They did turn to look at them, though they didn't stop their feeding, as the huge person began to talk. Excuse me, can you give me water, and some food? The man, Don Krieg, said, sounding mild. Money's not a problem. Then the remaining of his strength left and he collapsed. Jin had been unable to keep him from falling to the ground, but he did proceed to beg the chefs for anything to eat. Patty started laughing at Don Krieg's pathetic form. He jeered that they would not give them even a grain and declared that they will call Marines instead. Other chefs agreed, claiming Krieg to be too unpredictable to trust, and he would probably turn against them once he was given what he wants. Other customers agreed, even going as far as claiming that he deserved all the pain he was in for all the evil he had done. Krieg, too exhausted to get mad, promised to not do anything and to leave once he had been fed. He then proceeded to bow down his head and beg. The humbled sight of his boss made Jin tear up. Patty was kicked away by Sanji, who placed a bowl of rice and a bottle before the man, who barely managed a "thank you" before starting to devour the food. He's a really nice guy, isn't he? Luffy said, and Sabo nodded. I still think he's pretty rude. Usopp disagreed. Well, Sanji did tend to be rude to men and overly doting to women. What are you talking about? He'd be perfect for our crew. Nami replied, not because she disagreed with the sharpshooter but because she saw a personal slave in the chef. Next thing she knew, her captain was not sitting next to her anymore, though his plate was suspiciously absent. She blinked in mild, she'd come to expect the unexpected around Luffy already, surprised, and looked around the room for him. She located him between Sanji and Dun Krieg. Luffy looked a bit bizarre. His left leg was lifted against Krieg's inner elbow in a position of blocking his arm, but he was still eating. In Luffy's left hand was his plate of pasta that he was eating with the fork in his right hand. Every single person, with the exception of Luffy's nakama, blinked in an attempt to make sure their eyes were not playing tricks on them. Yo, Luffy greeted Jin casually. Do you have a death wish, brat? Krieg asked dangerously low. No I don't, but you're not the first person to ask me that. Why do people keep asking me that? Luffy replied with a thoughtful expression. Everybody's sweat dropped. Yeah, totally. Don Krieg aimed another punch at the straw hat wearing youth, but he was quickly evaded. Sorry about that. I don't normally interfere with other people's affairs and fights, but I kind of want that guy in my crew, so I can't really let you harm him. Luffy said with an apologetic look, which was ruined when he bit another furkful, while jerking his head at Sanji. Man, this guy looks like a bully. You sure you don't want to ditch him and be part of my crew? Luffy asked Jin. He had to dodge another punch from Krieg, who apparently didn't like what Luffy said. Don Krieg would have probably attacked him again, but he was interrupted by Patty's literally crabby-looking handheld cannon. Pirates are our customers all the time, so we have to be prepared for anything. Hope you enjoyed your dessert in the form of my syrup meatball. Patty's smug look turned to one of horror when Krieg actually answered. Serving such an awful dessert, what an awful restaurant this is. Smoke from the blast cleared up and revealed a completely fine Don Krieg. He was visibly wearing a strong armor made from some bizarre alloy that looked like gold, but clearly couldn't be since gold's too soft a metal to offer any real protection. Don Krieg's armor opened in various places and revealed various weapons stashed away. He opened fire while screaming something like, despicable. The guests from earlier completely freaked out and made a mad dash to get out of the restaurant, while hoping to be lucky enough not to get hit by a stray bullet. After ceasefire, Krieg looked around with a critical eye. This is a fine ship. My old one's ruined, so I'll take it, he declared. Oh yeah, the chefs totally agreed right away. Not. Don Krieg was met by loud protests. Shut up. I wasn't requesting, I was giving an order. Don Krieg pointed a thumb over his shoulder towards his battered ship. Aboard that ship are about 100 men still alive. Some of them have already succumbed to thirst and hunger. You are going to prepare enough food for my 100 starving men, he said arrogantly. What are you doing? You promised not to do anything of this sort, Don Krieg, so that I would take you here. This place saved our life. Jin protested. Krieg grabbed Jin by the shoulder and lifted him up. By the look on Jin's face, it did not feel very pleasant. Yeah, I feel energized. So now I have no need to act so pitiful. He dropped Jin to the floor. A bit further away at Luffy's table. Nay Sabo, don't you think Jin's like a dog? Luffy asked his brother. He does look like a dog. Sabo nodded. A dog? Nami echoed, curious. Yes, an abused dog with a mean master, one that has never known what's it like to live without that firm hand yanking his collar painfully. Sabo said, I don't think that Jin guy's a bad person, just someone who's had a rough break. But nevertheless it's a dog's nature to be loyal to its master. Nami finished with a sympathetic nod. An egotistical master. Zoro added quite accurately as Krieg kept on yapping about how strongest he is, and how when he gives his order it must be carried out simply because. Hey, Captain, where have we heard this kind of speech before? Zoro asked with a smirk. Where? Luffy asked excitedly like he was about to hear the best joke. Zoro puffed himself up pompously. I am the greatest marine captain ever, he said, making his voice sound much rougher, and making an arm motion like pounding a hammer. Luffy burst out in giggles. In fact, I am so great I got my ass handed to me by a rookie pirate captain. Zoro continued with the same voice, but with a sarcastic tone this time. Luffy giggled harder. You're so right. Some people have such big heads. How odd it is that I never like any one of them, he said after his laughing had subsided. Not at all, Sabo replied in a deadpan voice. By the way, have any of you noticed Krieg so self-absorbed in his tirade he hasn't even noticed Luffy's not so quiet laughing? And he was right. Krieg's shrieking was only cut off when a big bag was deposited in front of him. Here's enough food for 100 men. Get it to your ship, Zeph said without much emotion. What's that old man doing? Luffy inquired in confusion. Feeding starving people. That's what chefs do, Sabo replied. But wouldn't that put his restaurant in jeopardy? Nami asked. Well, no. Not as long as Luffy and I are in here. I'm pretty sure he's aware of that. I think. The young man shrugged, not completely sure of himself. Suddenly there were amazed whispers all around them. People were all amazed that East Blue's most dreaded pirate couldn't make it in Grand Line, as it became apparent just a moment ago. Don Krieg didn't pay them any mind, as all of it was directed at the head chef and owner of Barati. Your red leg Zeph, he stated in amazement before he got his expression back under control. So you're still kickin', huh? What of it? Zeph replied gruffly. Krieg proceeded to mock Zeph about having no choice but to make an honest living as a chef, as he could no longer be a pirate. Red Leg Zeph used to be quite infamous by having one hell of a kick strong enough to shatter cliffs and leave imprints on metal. Seeing as one of Zeph's legendary legs was cut off, continuing as a pirate would have been too hazardous. Krieg smugly pointed out all of those facts and more, but Zeph was unfazed. As long as I have my hands I can still cook just fine, so what's your point? The elderly chef grumbled. As a pirate you braved the Grand Line and returned safely. You must have kept a logbook about your travels. Hand it over, Krieg demanded pompously. Zeph flat out refused, wiping the smug grin right off Krieg's face. Then I shall have to take it by force. He roared, I couldn't get through the Grand Line. I have enough men, enough power, enough ambition. The only thing I lacked the last time was information. That is the only reason I failed. Bull, sheet, Sabo and Luffy sing-song together. You are lacking in certain other departments as well. Two of the most important ones I'd say. Sabo said with a roll of his eyes. Oh, and what would you two brats know? Krieg asked arrogantly. Luffy and Sabo didn't answer. They just looked around to room nonchalantly and whistled, innocently. Nope, they definitely do not call Grand Line home or anything. And what exactly do you think I'm lacking? Love from your nakama, Luffy, and your own willingness to die to protect them. Sabo. Don Krieg started laughing uproariously. You pitiful fools. The brothers only shook their head, pitying the captain. A house united is always stronger, but no matter what Krieg wouldn't understand that, so there's no need to even bother trying to explain. Statistically, even the vilest of successful captains would instinctually look out for their own crew. Only at Four Blues existed famous pirate captains who only reigned through fear. If that kind of captain should ever dare to venture to Grand Line she would be eaten alive, sometimes literally. What happened to Don Krieg was only the norm to his kind of pirate captains. Pathetic humor like that is the kind I like the most, Krieg declared, his spirits quite high. He took the bag of food over his shoulder and turned to leave, only slowing down to shout over his shoulder, those who do not wish to die should clear off before I return. The only things I want are that logbook and this ship. So Krieg left, leaving a heavily shaking, from grief and pain, Jin behind. The underling didn't even raise his head through all his shame while he apologized with a weak voice. I'm so sorry, Sanji-san. I never meant for this to happen, I didn't even think it. There's no need for an apology from the likes of you, idiot. Zeph groused, making Jin look up in surprise. We're just chefs, after all. That raised a loud protest from the other chefs, who were convinced Sanji wished to destroy the restaurant, or kill the owner so he could take his place. Their protest were only met by Zeph's loud berating and semi-mysterious monologue about what it feels like to have no food or water while trapped in the middle of the vast ocean. Just get out of the back door, if you want to get out. Zeph finished finally. That was met by a bunch of determined fighting cooks who refused to abandon the ship they called home. What on earth are you thinking? Jin yelled out suddenly. You've already seen how strong Captain Krieg is. Just get out of here and save yourself. He begged desperately, though in a pirate-y fashion. He's not that tough. Besides, his so-called army's just a bunch of half-starved sick people. Luffy replied matter-of-factly. He walked up to Jin and squatted so he could be face-to-face with him. I don't know how you could be so damn loyal to such a small bully like him. I honestly think you deserve better than some weakling realist with illusions of grandeur. He stood up and made a move to walk out to door. Though, if you want to join my crew the offer's still standing. He said over his shoulder. Suddenly his whole posture went stiff for a few seconds. Then he started giggling insanely. You alright? Jin asked, a bit concerned by the spontaneous bout of cackling. Well, not really, as it was already clear from their last meeting that the teen had a few loose screws. You've finally noticed, Sabo said with a smirk as he walked up to his brother. Zoro-san, please step outside. There's something I think you would like to see, he said with a mild smile. The entire Straw Hats crew plus the chefs went outside right in front of the battered galleon. It's pretty battered, isn't it? Luffy said with a wide carefree grin. What do you suppose caused it? It looks like it was cut. Zoro said, wary and unsure. Sanji snorted and rolled his eyes. You're totally right there, Luffy said with an enthusiastic grin. That's Mihawk's handiwork. Are you serious? Zoro gasped. Yup, I had a little chat with Sanji and Jin before, and he confessed to have been attacked by a person who would only be him. Behold, Zoro, that's what you would be capable of if you master Busoshoku. Pretty neat, huh? Zoro looked at the galleon and gulped. This is unreal, he whispered. Oh, it gets better. Sabo whispered to the swordsman with a sly smirk. What do you mean? Zoro asked the swallowtail coat-wearing man. You'll see, both the brothers said together. The slightly maniacal look in their eyes made Zoro a bit nervous. Suddenly there was a loud noise coming from the galleon, produced by about 100 men screaming their war cry. However, the enemy pirates did not make it too far as their big-ass ship was promptly cut cleanly in half. Chapter 5, Recruiting Some More, Part 2. Oh shit, Luffy screamed suddenly. Sabo, go make sure Mary won't get sucked into this. I don't trust those bounty hunters to retain cool heads in this situation. Sabo nodded and ran to Mary, which was tied to the other side of the restaurant. What a lucky twist of fate. Sabo mumbled to himself. If that sissy Marine lieutenant hadn't come, Mary might have been docked where it's actually dangerous right now. Luffy, what's going on? Zoro asked his captain seriously. I think you already know. Luffy replied with a sly grin. Zoro swallowed heavily and turned an intense gaze towards the wreckage again. Where? He whispered. Zoro started sweating nervously. Nami and Usopp shared a confused look. They had yet to realize what exactly happened. They both just theorized that one of their cannons somehow exploded and blew the ship apart. Neither even once considered that a single swordsman could cause this much damage with a single slash. Look, over there. A random Don Krieg pirate screamed as he noticed a coffin-shaped boat leisurely gliding through the waters. On that boat was a man about 40 years old. He was wearing a black sleeveless coat and a purple blouse, both unbuttoned, thus showing off his defined abdominal muscles and pectorals. On his head was a fancy hat with a big decorative feather. All that made the man look flamboyantly impressive, but what made the man even more memorable was the ornate oversized sword on his back. Wait until he glares at them. They're going to have nightmares for months. Luffy giggled as he watched Krieg's pirates panic, getting some bizarre sadistic amusement from their distress. You mean they're not already? Nami replied dispassionately. Oh, yeah, I guess they are. Luffy chuckled sheepishly. A brave or foolish man gathered up his wits and asked Mihawk why he had attacked them again. Mihawk only glanced at him, uninterested. I was bored, he replied aloofly. Apparently the pirate took offense. Don't bullshit us. He screamed and pulled a gun on Mihawk. He pulled the trigger. Nothing seemed to happen, but the blade seemed to magically appear in Mihawk's hand. Truth was, he just drew it faster than an average person could see, and used the blade to deviate the twin bullet's path. It resulted in a bunch of very odd but confused pirates. What wonderfully subtle and graceful skills, Zoro whispered, more than impressed. Every swordsman in the world is right to admire him. Predictably, for those who knew him, Hawkeye's dramatic scene was ruined by Luffy. Mihawk, how's Shanks? I haven't seen him in such a long time. He practically sang at the swordsman, drawing the attention of every single person to himself. Mihawk raised an eyebrow. There's a face I didn't expect to see in East Blue, and another I expect to see even less. Mihawk mused aloud, amused, as Sabo reappeared next to his brother. Good morning, Mihawk-san. I hope you are well. Sabo greeted with a polite smile. Why yes, thank you, Sabo-kun. Have you and your brothers stayed out of trouble lately? Mihawk replied with a similar polite smile. No, not a snowflake's chance in hell, I'm afraid. Sabo shook his head with a chuckle. Everyone, except Straw Hats and Zeph, who was only shaking his head in amusement, was stunned into silence. Hawkeyes, the celebrated most powerful swordsman in the world, was having small talk with unknown brats. What the hell was going on? Suddenly a proverbial bulb went off above Luffy's head, which most of the time was not a good thing. Mihawk, I wanna ask a favor from you, he declared. Sabo almost facepalmed. He was pretty sure he knew what Luffy was going to ask. I cannot guarantee my agreement, especially since it's you. Mihawk replied casually. Luffy only grinned, probably not even considering the possibility that he might be refused. This is Zoro, my first mate, and a Santoria user. Luffy pointed at Zoro. Mihawk glanced at the green-haired teen. He was young, of average height, and well-muscled, but the only thing that even remotely interested Mihawk was the word, Santoryu. That was an exceptionally rare style. He heard odd whispers of, Pirate Hunter Zoro, from Krieg's pirates. Apparently he was rumored to be the strongest swordsman in East Blue, however that didn't mean much to Mihawk, since it really was the weakest and most peaceful of all oceans. He aspires to be the greatest swordsman in the world, although he is very far from reaching that goal, believe me. Luffy laughed, oblivious to the disgruntled and annoyed look he received from Zoro. Sabo placed a hand on his shoulder and gave him an embarrassed, apologetic look in an attempt to soothe his irritation. Sadly, Luffy never learned the meaning of tact. Sabo believed it to be a family flaw. Would you grant him a spar to show him how far away he still has to go? Luffy finally voiced his request. Zoro's annoyance was instantly replaced with surprise. It has been a while since he had actually sparred with anyone. He wasn't sure he even remembered how to not fight seriously. At least not against a worthy opponent. What's your name, boy? Mihawk asked Zoro. Zoro chose to ignore the boy remark for now. Roronoa Zoro. What do you think of your captain's idea, Roronoa Zoro? Zoro took a moment before answering. Whether it is a spar or a showdown, it would be an honor to cross blades with you. Mihawk pondered for a moment before standing up to his feet. I came here to kill time anyway. I don't see why not cross blades with someone who actually knows how to hold a sword. As Mihawk said that, he sent a dismayed glance at a few of Krieg's pirates who were hanging on to cheap cutlasses like they were wooden sticks. In an instant Zoro was standing on the ruined ship's floating wreckage near Mihawk's coffin-shaped boat. He took off his bandana from his arm and tied it over his head. Usually he only would do it in a real duel, but even if it was just a spar, Hawkeye's would warrant the seriousness. He unsheathed his swords and waited for Mihawk to get ready too. Mihawk moved even faster than Zoro had. One moment he was still leisurely sitting on his boat, the next he was standing beside Zoro. He took his cross necklace and revealed it to be a small dagger. "What's that supposed to be?" Zoro asked, a little ticked off. "Seriously, Mihawk, what the hell?" Luffy screamed on the behalf of Zoro too. "Show him the difference between us." "Isn't that what you asked?" Hawkeyes replied coolly. "That is how far apart they are, Luffy." Sabo tried to calm his brother awkwardly. "Well, yeah, but you don't have to be such an ass about it." Luffy replied with a pout. Zoro couldn't believe what he was hearing. The captain was pissed because Mihawk was rude, not because he was underestimated. Were these people out of their damn minds, or was he really that weak compared to the summit? Whatever the case, he was majorly pissed off. At what or who, even he didn't know anymore. Their fight began. Zoro attacked head-on, however all three of his swords were blocked by the very tip of Mihawk's tiny dagger. As they continued on, the people around them looked on in awe. Except for Luffy and Sabo. Luffy was observing the battle with a carefree grin, but Sabo was feeling a sinister foreboding dread. Something about this spar felt off to him. Johnny and Yosaku, who had appeared about the same time as the fight began, were cheering Zoro on. They were screaming all the wrong things though. Bet you wouldn't like being told not to hold back while you're dishing out all you've got either. The grin on Luffy's face started fading when Mihawk stabbed Zoro in his chest. It wasn't too deep a cut, but it drew more blood than should be acceptable in a non-lethal spar. Finally Luffy began to feel the same unease as his brother. "Do you want this knife to go through your heart? Why aren't you stepping back?" Mihawk asked. "Not entirely sure myself." Zoro relied as if he didn't have a knife digging into his flesh. "But if I take a single step back now, it would feel like I had broken my promise, and I would never be able to stand before you again." "Yes, that's called losing." Mihawk pulled his dagger away. "Tell me, why do you aspire to be the best?" "For my own ambition, and a promise I made to a fallen friend." Luffy really did not like where this was going. This was far too serious for his liking. When did it change? He asked himself out loud. What? Nami asked what everybody was thinking. What did Luffy mean by change? This has been doomed from the start. Sabo replied Luffy, completely ignoring everybody else. Suddenly Luffy's mouth went dry. Mihawk had drawn his true sword, Koku to Yuru. Zoro and Mihawk dished out final attacks on one another. And after a suspense-filled moment, Zoro's two lesser quality swords broke and his chest squirted blood. Mihawk was completely unharmed. Zoro sheathed Wado Ikimonji, stood up, turned around, and spread his arms. "What are you doing?" Mihawk asked, showing mild signs of surprise. "A scar on the back is a shame of a swordsman." Mihawk smirked. "Well said." Mihawk would have landed a near-fatal blow to Zoro's chest if it weren't for the fact that the blade of his sword was suddenly stuck between Luffy's palms. He only had a moment to register the lad's pissed-off look before a powerful kick was aimed in his way. The kick had enough force to destroy another good portion of Krieg's already mixer-edge ship. Mihawk landed some distance away, looking a little windswept but otherwise not affected. Koku to Yuru was still in his hand. "What the bloody ghost fucking hell do you think you're trying to pull here?" Luffy screamed, nearly frothing with fury. "You agreed to a freaking spar. When the hell did you turn it into an actual duel?" Zoro, who had been angry just a moment ago for the interruption, smartly decided to quell his anger and keep his mouth shut. Mihawk actually looked sheepish, or as sheepish as he could. "My apologies, monkey. It's easy to forget when fighting against someone who has such a strong will. To prefer death over defeat is not something everyone could be capable of." Mihawk took a few steps closer. When he stopped he raised his sword and pointed the tip towards Zoro. "Don't rush your death, kid. Go to the real world, become stronger. No matter how long it would take I will await you in my strongest form. Surpass this sword. Surpass me. Roronoa Zoro," he declared loudly. Sabo wasn't sure whether to grin or facepalm, but Luffy seemed to be very pleased with the acknowledgement Mihawk gave to Zoro. That was all nice and all, but did he really have to be such a drama queen about it? Zoro unsheathed Wado Ikimonji and pointed the tip towards the other swordsman. "If I don't become the greatest swordsman, my captain would be in a real dilemma. So, as of right now, for as long as I shall live, I will not lose to anyone ever again. Until the day I can defeat you, I will never lose to anyone. Any problems with that, Pirate King?" During the entire vow Zoro's eyes were trained on Mihawk, but the last part was directed at Luffy. "None, whatsoever," Luffy replied with a shit-eating grin. Zoro and Mihawk sheathed their weapons. "You make a fine team. I hope to meet you again someday." With that Mihawk went to leave. "Wait," came the shout of both Luffy and Krieg. Mihawk stopped and glanced over his shoulder. "Didn't you come for my head? Aren't you going to have a drink with us?" Krieg and Luffy asked at the same time. The reaction was mixed. Some of Krieg's pirates nearly pissed themselves in fear as their captain prevented the swordsman from leaving. Others gaped at Straw Hat Lad for asking Hawkeyes to do something as humane as having a drink. A drink sounds nice. I think I've had enough fun for one day. Mihawk replied to Luffy, completely ignoring Krieg. Before you go, die. Krieg screamed and opened fire against Mihawk. Mihawk only rolled his eyes at the man's stupidity and swung his sword almost lazily to kick up some wood and water. The distraction was enough for Mihawk to slip away unnoticed. What most didn't realize was that Mihawk did not actually leave. Luffy took advantage of the ruckus Krieg and Mihawk created as well, and helped Zoro back to Baratie where Sabo wasted no time to patch him up. Usopp thought that he should get a big-ass hat too so he could hide some stuff there. After all, a bag is an obvious place to hide weapons and medicine, and would get confiscated immediately if they were ever apprehended. A hat would be less suspicious, and maybe in boots too. Those parasites. Sanji mumbled distastefully as Krieg shot one of his men for speaking what everyone else from his crew was thinking. I think he's so pathetic it's funny. Luffy giggled. Sanji almost jumped in startle. He hadn't noticed when the young Straw Hat's captain had snuck up to him. A glance sideways showed Zoro was still being bandaged by Sabo and Nami. He tsked in jealousy, momentarily daydreaming being carried by the ginger navigator himself. Luffy's cackling brought him back to reality. Is that so? What's funny about him? Sanji asked Luffy, only mildly curious. He thinks the only reason Mihawk is so strong is because he has a devil fruit ability. Hehe, and Zeph's logbook includes the information about a strategy how to deal with people like that. Luffy stopped explaining for a moment in favor of laughing. It's true that there's some very good ways to counter devil fruit users, but Mihawk isn't a devil fruit user. He's just that strong in his own right. Poor sucker. Sanji shrugged. Well, anyway it looks like they're about to attack. Hey, go to the control room and open the fin. Sanji told a random chef, who looked surprised by the order. Are you serious? We'll give them a place to fight that way. He protested. So what? If we let the interior of the restaurant get damaged the old man will never let us hear the end of it. The other chef apparently agreed because he disappeared. Speaking of the old man, where is he anyway? Sanji wondered. There was a battle cry, the enemy made a mad dash towards the restaurant. This is a pain, Sabo said, his voice betraying boredom. How should we go about this situation? While he was contemplating the best way to fight the pirates to alleviate his boredom Usopp had already started his counterattack. He had hidden behind Baratie's ruined door while sniping off as many people as quickly as he was capable. Sabo whistled in appreciation. You know, he's pretty fast with that thing. He said with a grin. Nice, but he's still not fast enough yet. Luffy nodded with a grin. Sadly he was right. The distance between him and enemies was too small, and Usopp would likely be killed before he could snipe off every Krieg pirate. Fortunately for Usopp, he had a very strong captain. Luffy launched himself off into the air and rained a parade of fists at his opposers. Everyone's mouths fell open in shock. Well, they didn't know Luffy had a devil fruit ability and seeing his fist stretch and multiply was enough to warrant a heart attack on a lesser man. Luffy landed back at Baratie, smoothly, after he was done pummeling Krieg's henchman. You brat, you have a devil fruit ability, don't you? Don Krieg declared loudly and confidently. Yups, I'm a rubber human. Luffy replied as he stretched his face to add emphasis. Suddenly a platform floated up from the sea and stuck to the boat. So, that's the effin', huh? Whoa, that's so awesome, Luffy exclaimed with stars in his eyes. Sanji, ignoring the distracted pirate captain, stepped on the surprisingly not slippery at all platform and declared. Why not fight to your heart's content now, you pirates? This is your opportunity. Krieg liked the idea of fighting without damaging the ship very much. Suddenly they were all distracted when the restaurant's figurehead, dislocated from the main ship. It turned out the figurehead was a miniature warship. Unfortunately, it wasn't very effective as Krieg only threw it away once it was close enough. It did get a few good shots at his goons beforehand though. Don Krieg, as a demonstration how smart he was, threw the warboat right at Baratie. The very same ship he wanted to himself and unharmed. Cue sweat drops. Thankfully the day was saved by Sanji who kicked it away from its course so it landed into the effin' harmlessly. Apparently cooking wasn't the only skill Zeph taught Sanji. Patty and Carne, who had steered the ship, weren't all that grateful though. From then on there was an all-out brawl between chefs and pirates, with chefs losing, but only until Patty and Carne joined in, then it was the pirates who were getting their asses handed to them. The tides were turned again when Patty and Carne were taken out immediately by a weird guy. Although nobody could tell he was such a weirdo yet because he was hidden in the water. It was only until he climbed to the fin his true nature was revealed. As Patty and Carne were lying on the floor, defeated, the weirdo started talking. What are you guys doing? He spoke with a noticeable lisp. Who's that dude? Luffy asked out loud. Well, he certainly looked like a weirdo. He was wearing a pinkish, pearl, helmet, metal shields on front and back of his body that also had pinkish pearls in the middle. Similar shields, just smaller, guarding both elbows and knees, and the same shields were also in his hands. But the real weirdness came out when he answered Luffy's question. I am Mr. Pearl, Invincible Iron Wall Pearl. He simpered with a laugh, commander of Krieg Pirates' second unit. I've won my last 61 battles completely unharmed. I have never been injured in battle, I've never shed even a drop of blood. I'm so beautiful, I love myself. Can I kill him? Luffy asked Sabo like a child would ask a parent for sweets. Ask again when my brains come home. Sabo replied with a vacant look. And I thought I've seen everything. What would happen if you'd make him bleed during battle? Luffy thought out loud. That's a good question. Let's find out. Sabo grabbed his staff and smacked Pearl in the face. He didn't hit very strong though, just strong enough to give him a nosebleed. Pearl completely flipped out and set himself on fire, literally. Sabo masterfully evaded the flame, but the tip of his coattail got a little singed. He tsked and took off his jacket, more annoyed at himself for allowing his clothes to get scorched than the actual fact that it got scorched. It was a pretty rookie mistake. Whoa, he's practically spitting fire. The restaurant will be ruined at this rate. Luffy commented calmly as the fin caught fire completely. You got time to make such comments, how about you think of a way to kill this fire? Sanji grumbled angrily as he kicked Pearl in attempt to take the freaky thing out. Luffy said thoughtfully while scratching his chin. Oh crap, Sabo mumbled. When Luffy made that face he more often than not comes up with the most bizarre plans. They're usually quite effective, despite their odd nature, but sometimes they're actually counterproductive. How about this? Luffy asked as he kicked his foot 30 feet in the air and brought it down with massive force, shattering the fin to pieces. Well, it did manage to douse the fire at least. What the fuck, Straw Hat? Are you trying to destroy this place? Sanji screamed. No, just the fire. Luffy replied simply. You destroyed a part of the ship. Sanji raged. Oh, I see. Luffy claimed with a mildly surprised look. Sanji gave up. Suddenly a roar resonated through the air and Pearl flew out, determined to pound Luffy into the ground. Luffy didn't react the least bit to the danger, but considering Pearl's face was kicked in by Sanji a moment later, he had no need to. That's enough. Their attention was grabbed by Jin, who had somehow taken Nami as hostage. Usopp was lying behind them, unconscious with a big lump on his head. For real, Sabo sighed. Are you honestly already desperate enough to try and take hostages? Desperate. Krieg guffawed from where he was standing. It doesn't matter what you do. Honor. Sympathy. They're for the weak. All that matters is that you win. How you obtain victory doesn't matter as long as you won't lose in the end. That sounds really boring. Luffy commented. How the hell can you be so fucking calm? Jin's got your beautiful navigator as hostage. Sanji raged at the seemingly unconcerned captain. Jin should worry more about his own life. Luffy said nonchalantly. And he was right. Not a moment later Jin grunted and made a mad leap to avoid the sword/courtesy of Zoro. Said swordsman looked highly disgruntled. You should have speared him. A random chef shouted at Zoro. And Zoro could have if he had wanted to, since he had been standing behind Jin. However, Zoro really didn't like attacking people from behind, no matter the situation. So he actually first got Jin's attention, then attacked from the side. If Jin didn't have such fast reflexes he would have gotten impaled. Using Nami as shield hadn't been an option from that angle. Jin, you useless piece of trash. You should have let him impale you, imbecile. Krieg raged. Jin hung his head in shame. Hey, Jin's your officer, isn't he? You're supposed to be the one protecting him, not demanding his life on a whim. Luffy raged at Krieg. Jin looked like a kicked puppy to him. His life is insignificant compared to my ambition. Krieg declared self-importantly. You devil-cursed, feces-covered, dick muffin. You're the captain, you're supposed to be the one protecting your nakama, not bloody abuse them. Luffy raged, stomping his feet. That's the difference between us, boy. Feelings of caring are for the weak. And only the strong can get to the top. Krieg declared self-importantly. While Luffy and Krieg were screaming their different opinions, Sabo went next to Jin. Your loyalties are truly admirable, but completely wasted on a man such as Krieg. He said quietly. Krieg is my captain. He's truly strong. Jin sobbed. Sabo shook his head. You haven't seen strong. Your captain is, for the lack of better term, pathetic. You're like a dog, Jin. And Krieg is like an abusive master. A dog's nature is to be loyal, but it yearns for a nice master. Sadly, because the dog doesn't know anything else but his master's cruelty, he can never be free. Look around a bit, and find a captain who will appreciate you the way you should be. With that, Sabo stepped away from Jin towards his younger brother. In doing so he exposed his bare back and tattoo to Jin, who fell over in shock. His gaping was noticed by Krieg and his crew. Jin-san, what's the matter with you? A random Krieg pirate asked. At first Jin couldn't find his words, instead he choked on his tongue and pointed a shaking finger at Sabo. I know that mark, he shouted as he finally regained control over his voice box. That's the mark of the current most powerful pirate, the only other pirate who gave Pirate King Gold Roger any competition. Whitebeard, he declared. Complete silence reigned for a moment, before whispers broke up everywhere. The pirates tried to peer at Sabo to get a glimpse at the mark, who only smiled in amusement and turned around to proudly display the mark for everyone to see. Krieg had to demonstrate his brilliance again. Ha 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 ha. This is perfect. Killing a few of Whitebeard's underlings is sure to bet me more infamy. He guffawed. That's also a sure way to get yourself murdered. Sabo replied with a smile. Pops is highly protective of all his kids. Whitebeard pirates are likely the most sanctioned, as they're sure to be avenged should they be harmed. Are you trying to intimidate me into sparing you? Krieg snorted. The brothers burst out laughing. No, intimidating people out of a fight is not our style. Sabo said through chuckled. But even if it were, we would have no need to with a weakling like you. Luffy finished. A vein on Krieg's temple pulsed angrily. Are you brats mocking me? He demanded. Yes. The brothers replied without missing a beat, completely straight-faced. Krieg whipped out a weapon. Let's see you laugh, when you're poisoned. He snarled. Whispers of MH5 was spread throughout the enemy pirates. Don Krieg, you can't be serious. Jin shouted. I'm very serious. Though, I usually wouldn't waste it on a pair of brats such as yourselves, but rather on a small village, or a warship. You ought to feel honored. Enjoy. You know, Lu, you do usually laugh when you're poisoned. Sabo whispered to his brother. I thought it annoyed him. Zoro, who made a surprise appearance, peeked in. If he notices he's being poisoned he's annoyed, if not then most of the time it puts him in a good mood. Really? Zoro asked with a raised eyebrow. Just then Krieg launched off the weapon, and immediately Luffy and Sabo realized something wasn't quite right about the projectile. Luffy grabbed onto Zoro and immediately jumped back alongside Sabo. Good thing too, as a barrage of shurikens exploded out of the projectile a moment later. Didn't he say he was going to use poison? Luffy wondered, confused. He was bluffing, Lu. Sabo explained patiently. Oh, so that's what he did. Luffy exclaimed while hitting his fist to his palm. How's Usopp? Luffy asked Nami who had been tending to the unconscious sharpshooter. He'll be fine, Nami replied. Then their attention was caught by a loud bang. The noise was created by Jin shattering Pearl's iron wall with his tonfa. From then on there was an all-out duel between Sanji and Jin. It was damn hard to watch, what with the brutal moves they pulled on one another. At one point Jin had Sanji pinned, but just as it seemed like he was the winner he got a burning cigarette spat into his face, dangerously close to his eyes, momentarily turning the tables. Then at one time Sanji pulled a completely unnatural-looking move that looked like it should have shattered Jin's spine, if it hadn't been for the blocking tonfa, which then on out had a slight indentation. Finally Sanji managed to crack their stalemate by somehow disarming Jin and having him pinned in a way that would have given a very wrong impression to an outsider. By Jin's blush he realized it too. Sanji was blissfully oblivious. The surrounding Krieg pirates were gaping with their mouths open, flabbergasted that their battle commander lost. Krieg didn't take it well either. The arrogant pirate captain pulled out another weapon. I'll show you, you little brats, why Krieg pirates are the most powerful in East Blue. He growled. You have the most people. Doesn't mean you're really strong. Luffy deadpanned. I'll show you the power that conquered East Blue. Krieg screamed and waved his weapon around like a lunatic. That's MH5, but for real this time. The pirates claimed and took out their gas masks. Jin took out his as well. Throw that mask away. Krieg screamed at Jin. I have no need for weaklings. You aren't one of mine anymore. Drop dead. Jin looked like all life's meaning was suddenly stripped from him. What a despicable coward you are. Sabo tutted. Don't say that. Jin protested, but rather weakly. Don Krieg is the strongest man in the world. There's no way for you to beat him. Jin, remember what I told you just a moment ago. Sabo shook his head sadly at the recently abandoned Krieg pirates battle commander. Just then, MH5. Krieg screamed and unleashed the true poison gas projectile. However, as it turned out the gas masks weren't even necessary, because just as soon as the gas exploded it was all sucked into Luffy. Said rubber boy looked like a bloated balloon by the time he had inhaled the last of the poison. He cupped his hands over mouth to prevent any poison from escaping while looking like he was having minor spasms. Krieg let out a loud guffaw. What a fool. All that talk about true strength and caring for your nakama. Now look where that got you. He laughed uproariously. Sabo, is everything alright? Zoro asked the older male, who suddenly looked really nervous. I mean, he'll be fine since he's immune to poison, right? I'm not worried about Luffy right now. I'm more concerned about us. Sabo confessed. Moderate amount of poison doesn't do anything to my kid brother, but if it's in abundance, well, it does have effects. What kind of effects? Zoro asked, suddenly feeling a foreboding dread. There hasn't been very many occasions when Luffy ingested a lot of poison, but the times he did, I just hope he only gets really sleepy. The last time he went into all-out rage that lasted for 4 days straight. We had to shackle him up with a lot of kairoseki. Just then Luffy final spasm imploded his body back to its normal size. Luffy let out a loud belch and a small cloud of mauve poison gas exited his mouth and withered into nothing. For a moment nothing happened. Then Luffy started shaking all over his body. The shivers got worse and worse until finally he let out a loud shout and started doing laps around Baratie at an enormous speed. Oh great, it has the same effect as coffee. Sabo groaned miserably and palmed his face. Luffy. He tried to get his brother's attention. Luffy continued his laps. Luffy. No effect. Luffy. Nada. Monkey D. Luffy. Pay me some goddamn attention. Comma. Nothing. Meat. Skittle. Skittle. Stop. Meat. Zoro snorted at the absurdity of the situation. Lu, I know you're really full of energy, but how about you take it out on him instead of the restaurant? Sabo suggested while pointing towards Krieg. Luffy blinked stupidly for a moment and then started quivering all over and a maniacal grin broke on his lips. With a sudden shout he took straight across water towards the older pirate. Krieg had no time to react before he got a chestful of rapidly pounding fists. And when I say rapidly I don't mean the usual multiplied looking rain of punches, but so fast there was visibly nothing there but skin-colored mist. A moment later his armor completely shattered, but the little unassuming looking but really monstrously strong runt did not stop his punches. So now Krieg enjoyed a thorough intestine rearranging massage. After Krieg was pulverized to the point he would definitely have to retire from piracy, but not yet into wooden shirt *****, Luffy leapt around like a demented frog before stopping and trying to whack random pirates from where he was standing. Because the pirates were in water and Luffy on remaining ship rubble, the game turned into a Gomu Gomu variation of Whack-A-Mole. After Luffy had gotten bored with that as well he returned to Baratie and proceeded to sprint laps around the restaurant. Back with the cooks and straw hats, another surprise was imminent. Things like that always seemed to happen around that youngling. A random voice said above them. Everyone looked up and most people's jaws dropped. Hawkeye's and owner Zeph, sitting on the balcony, sipping wine, and enjoying the view. Owner, since when? A random chef sputtered. It's not every day a restaurant is visited by a Shichibukai. Just common courtesy to at least offer a drink, isn't it? Zeph snorted. Oh, what are you drinking? Sabo, one of the few not at all surprised, climbed to the balcony to have a better look. A vintage from North Blue, Wowu Kingdom. It has a very unique taste, quite exquisite. Mihawk replied and poured Sabo a glass. Thunk. Snore. Luffy had suddenly collapsed and started snoring loudly. Oh good, I was afraid he might start a fire with his running. Zeph commented. When Luffy woke up it took him a moment before he panicked loudly and screamed for his hat. Suddenly it was deposited on his head. Luffy looked up to see his smiling brother. Ah, morning Sabo. Hello Lu. Did you have a nice sleep? Era, where did everybody go? Luffy asked, confused. They left after you pounded Don Kriegs to the ground. Captain, you're finally awake. Nami entered the room. Hey, Nami-chan, you look happy. The ginger navigator grinned like a cat that got the canary. Krieg had quite a bit of loot in that ruined ship of his. Although getting it all was a bit difficult. Speak for yourself. Zoro grumbled as he entered the room as well. You forced me and that pervy love cook to dive multiple times until we had salvaged all that we could and more. You didn't lift a fucking finger. Stop complaining, it was for the greater good. Nami sniffed. Greater good for whom? The swordsman growled. Ah, for the dearest goddess, I would dive to the bottom of the deepest ocean if only she commanded. Over and over again, and bring about the purest of pearls. I would. The fair-haired chef entered as well, singing praises to Nami. Yes, yes, thank you. Nami waved his appreciation away, but the man only looked happier. Luffy's awake. Usopp tried to enter the room as well, but since so many people were blocking the doorway he only ended up making everybody collapse into a heap. Usopp. Nami suddenly seemed to transform into a she-demon and the sharpshooter gulped nervously. Get the hell off me, you love cook. Zoro growled when hard-eyed Sanji made no move to get up, his head was pretty close to Nami's bust. Am I interrupting something? A timid voice asked from the doorframe. The sight was an odd one. Jin had just walked in on. The straw hat lad was sitting on the bed, his older brother standing next to him, and the rest of the crew plus Sanji all in a bundle on the floor. Hey, Jin, I thought all Krieg's men had left. Luffy greeted, genuinely happy to see the older man. Oh, I didn't go with them. Jin said, looking a little nervous. Since Don Krieg pretty much fired me I'm not sure I'd be welcome again with him. And after what you did to him I'm not even sure he can continue as a pirate. No future there, the last part was mumbled. Okay, so what you gonna do now? I'm not sure. Find another pirate crew to join, probably. Cool, you can become my nakama. Luffy exclaimed happily. Jin blushed sheepishly, not so secretly hoping the kid would say that, and bowed his head deeply. Thank you for this opportunity. I promise I will not let you down. Awesome, I got 2 new crew members. Luffy grinned. Oi, why are you counting me? Luffy gave Sanji the puppy eyes of doom. No, Sanji said and turned his head so he wouldn't be persuaded by the uber adorableness. A ringing sounded throughout the ship, signaling a mealtime. Sanji led the group to the dining room where all the chefs were already pigging out. An incident that started with Patty insulting Sanji's cooking chased the blonde chef out of the hall. Then the other chefs explained to the Straw Hats that they only insulted his cooking and were generally being mean to Sanji on purpose to make him feel unwelcome and encourage him to finally leave the restaurant to chase after his own dream. Unknown to everybody except the brothers as they were skilled at Kanbunshoku, Sanji heard the entire conversation as he was standing right behind the door. Incidentally, that also convinced him to go and find All Blue. And that is how the Straw Hats pirates got their amorous chef. The group had set sail from Barati, and just as night fell the booze was broken out. "Now, our dear newest comrades," started Usopp, as Jin and Sanji sat next to one another with confused looks. "We will now commence with christening you as our nakama. Let the ritual begin," he exclaimed. "Ritual," both men echoed. Bang! Nami hit a bottle of booze on the table. "You two are going to have a drinking competition with our captain," she declared. "I'm in." Jin grinned, in no need for more prompting. "I don't know, I don't usually drink too excessively." Sanji hesitated. "Chicken," Zoro mocked. "Fuck no. I'll drink all you losers under the table if I have to." The chef replied hotly. "Good. First round." Nami began the semi-friendly competition. Fist mugs went smoothly. Seconds went a little happier. Thirds went with songs. Fourths went with more singing. Fifths went with occasional hiccuping. Sixths went, already too happily. Sevenths, let's take a closer look. Otherwise you wouldn't believe me. Jin and Sanji had their arms around each other's shoulders while singing uproariously. Suddenly, without paying too much attention what he was doing exactly, Jin smacked a kiss on Sanji's cheek. Sanji, not one to be indebted, returned one of his own. Suddenly they both turned their heads and touched lips in an innocent enough way. At least it started out innocent enough, but then it started to get longer and longer, with a little bit more tongue the longer it went on. Finally it lost all innocence and the pair of men fell off their perch, hands everywhere all over each other and lips permanently locked. The rest of the crew were too busy gripping their sides laughing and trying to keep a lid on their bladders to even attempt to separate the pair, who were no doubt going to be completely mortified the next morning when sober. Sabo produced a camera and took a nice bunch of pictures for blackmail. "This is just too rich." Zoro chortled. "Guys, I think we at least should have the courtesy to make sure they don't find any place too private. Who knows what might happen?" Sabo suggested, sending the rest into another bout of laughter. "I hope they remember this in the morning," Usopp said once he had caught his breath. "Kanpai." Luffy cheered.